Hello everyone, welcome to Black Fog, your guide for drifting off. I know you listen to help you fall asleep, so like and subscribe to Black Fog before we start. Where are you from and what's your time? Now get comfortable and relax. The summer Texas air hung heavy and thick, clinging to everything like a wet blanket, even as the evening sun dipped low. My name is Oliver, and for me, it was just another shift at Schlitterbahn Water Park. My new maintenance tech gig was a decent step up from pulling all-nighters at Waffle House, even if it meant wrestling with chlorine levels and clearing out gross drains. But tonight's task was different. Tonight, I had to dive to the bottom of the Maw. This wasn't just any water slide. The Maw was the park's newest, biggest, and without a doubt, its most unique attraction. It was a giant slide, but the real showstopper was at the very end. The park owner, Sterling, a dude with more money than sense and a famously macabre taste, had bought it. It was a shark statue, dredged from the cold, murky depths of some forgotten lake. According to Reddit, the statue was a prop from a low-budget horror flick, sunk by its creators to startle unsuspecting divers after production wrapped. I'd seen the pictures online, the ones that popped up if you dared to search for abandoned lake shark statue. They were unsettling, sure, but more fascinating than frightening to me. Just a big, weird piece of art. A quick warning. If you have even the slightest bit of submechanophobia, don't look them up. This massive great white, its head frozen in a bizarre, vague smile that looked almost unintentional. A subtle upward curl at the corners of its mouth that just seemed off. But to me it looked cool as hell in the pictures. Sterling had spent a fortune retrieving it, then even more having it mechanized. Now for just a few extra bucks. After a screaming descent through twisting, dark tubes, riders were spat into a vast, deep pool where the shark, its mouth agape in that almost menacing smile, loomed directly beneath the surface, occasionally lunging upward towards the guests with a hydraulic hiss along a 20-foot track that made the whole pool rumble before the machines pulled it back, making it descend out of sight to the deepest area of the pool, waiting for the next round of unsuspecting victims to trigger the sensor. Tonight, after the last shrieking kid had been ushered out and the gates locked tight, the Maw was silent. Not just quiet, but a profound, almost oppressive stillness that felt strangely peaceful. I ran through my checklist, filters, pressure gauges, and then the shark itself. The most critical sensor was acting up, meaning I had to get in the pool and check its housing. I grabbed my dive gear, feeling a pleasant calm. Just another Tuesday night. I strapped on my dive mask, adjusted the regulator. The hiss of my own breath a steady, comforting rhythm in my ears. The pool water, usually a chaotic riot of splashing, was perfectly still, reflecting the distant park lights like scattered diamonds. I pushed off the edge, sinking smoothly into the cool, chlorinated embrace. The world above vanished in a ripple, leaving me suspended in a dim, watery silence. As I descended, the surface light gradually dimmed, the familiar blue-green deepening to an inky black. I flicked on my dive light, the beam cutting a crisp, clear path through the gloom. And then there it was, the shark itself. I'd seen it 100 times from the surface as well as the photos online, but being eye level with it underwater was different. It was huge, dwarfing me, but still just a statue. Its cold, unseeing eyes, twin black voids, didn't bother me. But that smile, so odd, that faint, almost evil-like curl at the corners of its mouth. I figured it was just how the mold settled, a trick of the artist's hand. It seemed to expand slightly in the low light, but that was just the water, the lack of real vision. A mild curiosity and nothing more. At least that's what I told myself. I forced myself to focus, kicking slowly, deliberately, towards the shark's head. The faulty sensor was located near its jawline. The water directly around the shark was surprisingly clear, almost unnaturally so, as if the massive form repelled the usual murk, granting me an unobstructed view. As I drew closer, the details sharpened. The rough, pocked texture of its fiberglass skin, somehow organic despite its artificiality. The perfectly formed teeth, each one a predatory shard. And that smile, the one that just didn't quite sit right, seemed to deepen. Not wider, not more aggressive, just deeper. A subtle crinkle around its mouth that hadn't been there before. I paused, treading water. Ha! Must be the angle or maybe a trick of my dive light bouncing off the contours. I took a steadying breath, the sound loud and calm in my ears. Just a statue, I murmured, the words a garbled bubble. Just fiberglass and hydraulics. I forced my fingers back to the panel, finding the latch. I finally got it open, revealing a tangle of wires. I quickly checked the connections, nudging a loose one back into place. Done. I started to close the panel, already thinking about getting out and grabbing a cold bottle of sweet tea. Just as my fingers brushed the panel to close it, I glanced up. The shark's head seemed to have shifted a fraction, the subtle tilt to the left a bit more pronounced. And the smile? It had deepened, just a hair more, a hint of something sly, almost knowing in its fixed grin. A prickle of unease finally touched my calm, an uninvited chill under my wetsuit. I blinked, shaking my head. Currents. Gotta be the currents. I pushed off the statue, kicking backward. I felt a deep but very brief vibration that seemed to emanate from around the statue itself. My heart gave a little thump, a nervous flutter. Okay, that was weird. The hydraulics were offline. The park was deserted. I was the only one here. Must have shifted slightly with the water currents, or maybe I'd bumped it. I needed to get this done. I needed to check the track itself where the shark slid. That would mean swimming past it to its flank, towards where the tail would be. I hesitated for a fraction of a second, that strange, unsettling feeling growing, but I pushed it down. It was silly to be spooked by a hunk of fiberglass and paint. With a deep breath, I swam past the shark's massive, immobile head, past its still body, until I was almost at the tail end of the mechanism, my back to the shark's in its entirety. I worked quickly, checking the rollers on the submerged track, my light beam dancing over the metal, the familiar routine a welcome distraction from the rising unease. As I pulled my gloved hand back to adjust my light, a sudden, sharp click echoed through the water. It was loud, like metallic and unsettling, almost like teeth clinking together. And it was too close. My breath hitched, a sudden, involuntary spasm. The sound was too precise, too deliberate to have been an accident. My mind screamed at me to spin around, to see, but my body was suddenly paralyzed, muscles locked, refusing to obey. The silence that followed the click was even worse, a heavy, expectant quiet that seemed to hum around me. Every nerve ending in my body screamed wrong, wrong, wrong. I steadied my light, my fingers fumbling, and as I started to attempt to calm myself, a sudden, oppressive cold radiated from behind me, making the terror that was in my blood run even deeper with each passing second. It wasn't the water. It was a presence, a chilling weight, a suffocating awareness that filled the space directly behind me. Slowly, reluctantly, as my whole body screaming in protest, my head swiveled and my entire body froze in its tracks. Couldn't breathe. I couldn't move. I couldn't think. All I could do was stare in horror at the sight before me. The shark. It was no longer facing forward, its head merely tilted. No, no, no. It hadn't even just tilted further, a gradual nor a deliberate lean into my personal space. Its entire body was turned completely on its axis, now facing me head-on. Its nose was now only a mere 5 feet away from the protective glass of my mask. Its mouth, already agape, seemed to widen, a slow, silent stretch of its impossibly broad jaw that swallowed more of the dim light from my beam. The grin was not just vague, deep, or sly anymore. It was a monstrous, impossible rictus of pure, menacing evil. It stretched impossibly wide, pulling back, 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 until its lips seemed to tear, revealing every single one of its impossibly white, jagged teeth, each one a perfect, ancient blade. Its eyes, those dead, black, unseeing eyes, were now ablaze with a malevolent, hungry glee, reflecting my own terrified, distorted face in their depth. It was still immobile as it always had been, still as night, but its expression showed a sliver of hidden mortality that shook me to my core. It wasn't just watching me. It was savoring my terror, a silent, yet deafening laugh in its fixed, demonic smile, a cruel amusement in its paralyzing gaze. It was alive, and it was playing with me. Oh, fuck. I didn't bother with my tools. I kicked with desperate, frantic, soul-shattering force, propelled by pure, primal terror through the water. The silent grin of the maw, its eyes lit up with sinister delight, burned itself into my mind, its own special brand of terror. I clawed my way upwards, kicking and thrashing, desperate to break the surface, to escape the crushing darkness. My lungs burned, screaming for air, the dim outlines of the surface lights shimmering tantalizingly above. I was halfway there, a choked sob bubbling from my throat, when I couldn't help myself. I took one last, terrified, agonizing look back. The track was there, but the fucking shark was gone. Nothing but the wavering reflection of the park lights and the silent, swirling chlorine.
No.
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 I thrashed and kicked furiously towards the lights that swore me my safety, my eyes playing tricks on me, every bubbly wave from my erratic movements that momentarily obstructed the few inches of clear vision I had was a fin and a flash of a gigantic tooth. The surface seemed a million miles away, the fear that I would be pulled back down to bottom of the darkness the second before I finally reached the safety the dock weighing me down. But I scrambled out of the pool, tearing off my mask, my breath coming in ragged, painful, heaving sobs that racked my whole body. I stumbled backward, away from the wooded edge, my gaze fixed on the water, watching it slowly settle, the placid surface a cruel lie. I knew it wasn't empty. That fucking thing was still there, somewhere. And I knew, with a horrifying, absolute certainty that stole my breath, that it had just let me go. For now, that was my last night at Schlitterbahn. I put in my 2 weeks the very next morning. No explanation given, just a flat, I'm done. Sterling called me multiple times, begged me to reconsider, even offered a bonus. Oliver, please. I'm not sure what happened, but we can fix this. Just tell me what you want. Give me a number, man. I'll match it. But I just hung up. I couldn't set foot in that place again, especially not near that pool. The thought of that black fucking abyss beneath the water of that pool was enough to make me gag. As it would turn out, the park closed down for good a few months later. The official line was unforeseen operational difficulties, but everyone knew it was just code for, we can't tell you why, but it's bad. A few days later, Sterling just dropped off the face of the earth, and no one has seen or heard from him in a year. They never mentioned the shark in any capacity. It was never spoken of again, almost like they had done their due diligence to erase the fact that it even existed. I don't know what happened to it, if it was ever moved again, or if it just stayed there, along with the rest of the park, abandoned and waiting in the depths of the now disgustingly unkempt water. I hope to God no one ever finds it, not in that pool, not in any lake, ever again. May it be lost forever. But unfortunately for me, it doesn't matter if it's hidden from the rest of the world. I see it every night, that grin, those eyes, just before it vanished. It's always there, waiting, in the darkest corners of my dreams, bubbling beneath the surface of my consciousness. And now, I can't even look at a swimming pool without feeling that cold dread, that lurking, predatory presence all around me, watching me. Open water? Forget about it. The world suddenly feels too deep and too full of things that watch you from the dark, things that hunt you, things that smile. Holy shit. A breaking story on the news tonight immediately caught my attention while I was eating dinner. A group of parents are desperately pleading for anyone who can give them information on the potential whereabouts of their missing children. 3 teens have been missing since last night. They were last seen by a homeless man hopping the fence of a local abandoned water park. The neighborhood I reside in now is the nicest place I've ever lived. Beautifully kept, with trees so vibrant and skies so clear, you'd think someone had turned up the saturation. Not only that, but this place has one extra perk that trumps them all. No one ever used to use it. From what I can understand, it's a gamble, and a very expensive one at that. I also know there's something alive under my neighborhood. No one here has ever seen whatever or whoever it is, but we all know it's there. Superstitions have never had any hold on me. Walking under a ladder, breaking a mirror, and black cats were no more special to me than any other mundane aspect of my life. Sure, I thought the idea of it was cute, a story to inject a little bit of magic into the lives of children. But, just like Santa Claus, there was no truth behind them in my eyes. It's the reason I was so surprised when I moved to my new neighborhood, the one with the wishing well behind the old church. I could see it from my window, sitting abandoned across the street. Even as a child, I understood that the purpose of fairy tales was to bring joy, mystery, or some other moral lesson to the listeners. They were a positive thing. So why then did everyone here act like this? Why is it a taboo to even speak about the well? The day I moved in, there was no welcoming party. No friendly neighbors to greet me like in my old town. There was only a note taped to my front door, and even that was blunt. You will only be warned once. The well is not to be used. Stay away from it. It wasn't signed or addressed, but I chalked it up to a crazy neighbor. It didn't take long for me to forget all about it. This suburban town was a lot quieter than the city life I had come from, but I didn't mind it. I kept to myself, mostly. Always have. Easier that way, especially after things fell apart with my sister. We hadn't spoken in years. The neighbors were friendly, and despite living alone, I never felt lonely. There was nothing out of the ordinary with the exception of that one small, looming detail. Any time the well was mentioned, no matter by who, people's smiles would drop like a sinking stone. The subject would immediately be changed, and if it wasn't, people would simply excuse themselves from the conversation. I learned this the hard way when I made the mistake of asking about the well at a barbecue I had been invited to. I may as well have insulted the dead, the way everyone stared. My host pulled me aside to another room. I could hear the chattering continue as soon as I left. They explained to me only that the well was not up for conversation. I asked why, and I was then asked to leave. From that day on, I figured I'd play along. I mean, everyone was friendly enough, and I didn't really care about the well. Why not just let it be? The next week, that same neighbor invited me out for coffee 2 towns over. I found it annoying. I wasn't in the mood to socialize, and they knew I had nothing else going on that day, which made it hard to come up with an excuse without seeming rude. Still, curiosity won out. That's when I finally got some version of the truth. Anyway, it wasn't much. Vague, cautious, and watered down, but it was more than anyone else had been willing to say. In a hushed voice, they told me people here are afraid of the well. It's older than the neighborhood, older than the church, maybe even older than the town itself. No one maintains it, no one dares, yet it never changes. The bricks never crumble. Plants don't grow over it. There's no mold, no moss. Even the birds won't perch on its edge. I didn't believe a word of it. Ironically, I think my unbelief in the supernatural is what saved me from it at first. It started with a man a few houses down. I didn't know him well, but I'd seen him out on his porch most days, usually with a drink in hand and a tired look in his eyes. One day he stopped showing up. A neighbor whispered that he'd lost his job. Another said he was about to lose the house too. Then one night someone saw him at the well, drunk, talking to it like it was a priest or a god or an old friend. He tossed a coin down and made a wish. A week later, he won the lottery. $500,000. Just like that. No one said it out loud, not at first. But everyone knew. The timing was too perfect. The man who'd been sleeping in his car was now driving a brand new SUV, wearing a gold watch, talking about moving to Florida. Took time, but slowly, people started getting brave. A coin, a wish, a new car in the driveway. A coin, a wish, a promotion no one had seen coming. A coin, a wish. A woman who'd been in hospice walked out of her house 2 weeks later, smiling like nothing had ever been wrong. No one ever admitted it. No one talked about it. But the silence in this neighborhood started to feel different. Not cautious, expectant, like everyone was waiting their turn. The tricky part about gambling is that it is a trick in and of itself. A game of Russian roulette. But the rewards were too sweet to resist. The next wish didn't go as well. I actually knew this one personally, Dale. He lived at the very end of the street. The kind of man who owned 3 cars and made sure you knew about each of them. Loud voice, louder opinions. People saw him that night, dressed too nice for a midnight stroll, holding a coin the size of a silver dollar. He made a big show of dropping it in. The next morning, his front door was wide open, swinging on its hinges. The inside looked like a tornado had blown through the house. Shattered glass littered the floor. The furniture was overturned and torn, and a trail of dark streaks led from the stairs to the door. They smelled like mud and mildew. No one has seen Dale since. We did, however, find his wedding ring caked in mud on the ground outside. I should mention that, the morning Dale disappeared, there was a 4th car in his driveway. A bright blue Bugatti Veyron. Brand new. Clean. Keys still in the ignition. Expensive even for someone like him. After Dale, things went quiet again. No more coins. No more wishes. The Bugatti sat in his driveway for a week before it disappeared, towed in the middle of the night by someone no one seemed to recognize. No paperwork. No questions. People stopped talking about the well entirely. Conversations grew stiff when it came up, then stopped altogether. Barbecues resumed. Lawns were trimmed. Porch lights flicked on at the usual times. It was as if Dale had never existed. That was the rhythm of this place. A quick flirtation with the forbidden, followed by complete, willful silence. No one warned newcomers anymore. They just watched, waited to see who would get curious first. I never intended for that to be me, but my mind was made for me. I got the call late at night. A drunk driver, an intersection, and my sister. She was alive for now, but in critical condition. I rushed to the hospital to see her, but they wouldn't let me in the room. They gave me the usual spiel. We're doing everything we can, but I saw it in their eyes. She was a goner. The drive home felt unreal. I loved my sister, despite the silence, despite the petty fight. I never stopped. I just never said it. The doctor's words rang in my head again. Doing all we can. But I wasn't. There was still one thing I hadn't done. One thing I could still do. The rest of my drive home was spent calculating and justifying what I knew I was going to do next. 5 wishes had been made. Of those, only one ended badly. A 1 in 5 chance to save her. It was past midnight by the time I pulled into the driveway. The neighborhood was still. No wind. No barking dogs. Not even the distant hum of cars. Just that heavy kind of silence that feels like it's listening. I stood outside my front door for a long time, keys in hand, staring across the yard. The well sat behind the church, tucked just beyond the fence line. It was barely visible from my house, just a ring of brick swallowed in shadow. But tonight I could see it clearly, as if it wanted to be seen. I didn't go inside. I walked. Each step felt heavier than the last, like the air thickened the closer I got. The grass underfoot was damp even though it hadn't rained in days. The church loomed to my right, its windows dark. I half expected to see someone watching me from inside, but there was nothing. Just me and the well. I reached into my pocket and found a coin I hadn't remembered putting there. A dull penny. I almost laughed. My sister's life in exchange for this? But it wasn't about the coin. It never was. I stepped forward, cleared my throat. My voice shook, but I forced the words out. I want my sister to live. The coin dropped. There was no sound, no splash, just an endless silence. I backed away from the well slowly, like with a wild animal, and spent the rest of the night by my phone, waiting for a call. I didn't sleep. I sat on the couch with the curtains cracked just enough to see outside. The well was just a silhouette, unmoving, undisturbed. I watched it like a hawk, as if it might change its mind and spit the coin back out. I started writing this sometime around 3 a.m., while I was still waiting for the hospital to call. I didn't know if I'd ever get the call, or if something else would happen first. I just needed to get it all down just in case. The phone finally rang just after 6 a.m. I fumbled it to my ear before the second ring. My heart was already halfway out of my chest. It was the hospital. She was awake, stable, breathing on her own, responding to questions. The nurse called it a miracle. I didn't speak for a full 10 seconds, just held the phone to my ear and listened to the sound of the universe tipping sideways. I thanked them. I don't remember what else I said. I just know I was smiling when I hung up. And then I looked out the window. Someone is peeking over the wall of the well, looking me right in the eyes. Skin white like paper, bloated like a waterlogged corpse. Every few minutes it moves a little, an inch here, a twitch there, but it never stops staring. It's leaving the well slowly, a hand over the edge, then an arm. Now I can see its mouth, or the beginning of it anyway. It's vertical. It starts at its lips and runs down its throat, a long seam that splits its head in half. I can't see how far it goes. I'm sure I'll find out very soon. I already tried running. When I went to the door, it was there. I saw it through the peephole, just standing on the other side, gasping, bubbling like something drowning in its own breath. Its skin dripped black water that pooled on my porch. But when I backed away, panicked, and looked out the window again, it was still by the well. My front porch was empty. Unlucky as it is, I made this gamble. My sister gets to live, and that's what's important. I just hope she sees this so she can know I'm sorry. The strange thing about lying on your deathbed is how liberating everything is. The consequences to come are the consequences you can't avoid. And that perfect little piece that is your existence is firmly put into the puzzle of life by God's hand. The light that is my soul will be another glowing dot on that never-ending canvas that is the night sky. I'm not a very religious man. Haven't been a wholehearted, hands upon the ground, belting songs loud enough for God to hear and praise kind of Christian for decades. There was a moment in my life when I thought God would protect me from any evils as long as I had my faith and devotion. But at this point, I've said enough prayers and wished enough miracles to know that it's probably not going to happen. I do believe there's a God. I never thought there wasn't, but I think he's a little different from what people think. When there's no one, there is God. Seems like that's the case. So here I am, laying down on my humble bed, with my old blanket over me, my head propped to the side to look out the window. An average man meeting a fitting end. I've come to terms with the fact that my life wasn't meant to be lived spectacularly a long time ago. My inevitable death was a painful warning in my young mind for a while, but when it finally faced me, I accepted it. All I have left is the last thing to push off my feeble conscience. A small burden to ease off my frail body. It's a memory not meant to entertain, but to help me die a little bit easier. Call it selfish, if you will. Call it cowardice, if you must. I don't have the time in my life to be offended by an ugly truth. Soon my children, my relatives, my wife will all surround my bed, hold my hand, and cry. They will pile up pillows behind my head to ease my aches. They will rub my shoulders to relieve any tension. Their tears will fall onto my sheets. I'll smile a sweet farewell and wish my loved ones a happy life like I have lived. My body will finally be put to rest. I would finally die, and in the afterlife, I'd burn in the flames of hell. My hometown was small, as these things usually are. It's nothing unexpected. The rich people had their neighborhoods, as did the poor. I was lucky enough to be smack dab in the middle. I didn't have the passion or drive to oversucceed academically or in sports. My parents didn't expect that of me or my two brothers either. They were the type to kick open the backyard and let their three little mongrels play till the sky got dark and the fireflies went to bed. I can still remember when the days were good, when our knees would be stained by grass, our hands sticky with sap, and our mouths tasting of freshly plucked honeysuckle. I think if the earthquake never happened, then our town would be painfully normal. Oh, the earthquake of '34. The older kids called it the Kraken, a menacing earthquake that hit our town the hardest. I was too young to remember it, but whenever I mention the catastrophe, my parents and my oldest brother, William, would wear blanched expressions and try to change the subject. From what little I heard, it was a horrible time. Houses were demolished in seconds. Families left destitute. Apparently, the town used to be big and bustling, and now its meager existence is the everlasting effect of the Kraken. After the earthquake, there were huge, bottomless, stretching ravines across the town. No one knew why they came to be, why there were so many, or how deep they were, but no one really wanted to find out. We boarded up the houses that had the pits. We gated off any parks that were subject to the ravines. We tried to ignore them best we could. Us kids called the ravines crevices. William thought that they were the gateway into hell. My second oldest brother Louis thought they lead to another dimension. I, however, just simply thought they never ended. It went down, 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 and had no bottom. Just an utter darkness. Every time we looked at one, a shiver would run down our spines, sweat down our faces. There was something wrong with those crevices. When you look at it on or even come close, you feel imminent horror. The same horror you feel when you see a wild tiger baring its teeth at you. You want to run, you want to cry, you want to simply get away. It was instinctual down to our DNA, that fear. It was like your own soul was frightened by the things. But there we stood. Fear is always blatantly overshadowed by sheer curiosity. There was a well-known crevice in the overgrown field 2 streets down from us. It was the only one that I could handle and the only one that my brothers allowed me to go to when I was still young. It was much smaller than the massive splits in the ground that were prevalent in our neighborhood. If we had nothing to do, we'd just go there. You had to leave in the evening, when your pop would pass out on the couch from a post-work exhaustion and your mother would be off in town. You would slip out through the door, run the 2 streets down, find the hole in the gate, and count your steps to get to it. 37, I believe. Tall, thick grass made it difficult to spot from far away. This crevice was still rather dangerous. A medium-sized child could easily fall down, but it wouldn't be a plummeting death. You'd just get stuck a few meters down. If you were smart, you weren't alone and somebody could fetch an adult and hopefully you'd be safe. Nobody had the luck to be dumb, so every time you went out, you traveled in groups. 3 or more in case one died on the way home. We'd all grow used to the fear the more we came and became more bold. Sometimes we sat on the edge and let our feet dangle out, talking about how deep it must be. Eventually, we were comfortable to the point where we'd even jump over it, laughing and screaming as we did so. The only person who refused to participate was our noble leader, William. I knew he was still a little nervous due to his experience with the Kraken. Our only rule was to not go anywhere close during the night. The darkness made William nervous. We respected that. These visits were mostly just the 3 of us. We were very close brothers, 3 souls who were connected by the hand, a kinship sewn from one finger to the other. That crevice was ours and ours only. Some of our other friends would come once in a while, but every kid in the neighborhood knew that it belonged to us. You only came if you were invited. It was a mutually agreed upon fact. We were happy children until a new family moved next door when I was about 9. The Lindens. They tore down the old house next to ours and were building a brand new one, large and magnificent. Powerful, square-shouldered parents with an equally intimidating pair of children. All four members of the family had blonde hair that glowed in the moonlight and pale blue eyes that stared into the soul. The two children were twins, both of them only 12, just like me at the time. Mary and Philip. "Mother told us to be friends with you," was the first sentence Philip told the three of us. It was around evening time, all five of us on the sidewalk between our houses. They were wearing pristine woolen coats, and Mary's hair was immaculately braided back. It was a shocking contrast between our appearance and theirs. Both twins had flushed skin that didn't have a single blemish or scar on it. I thought they were aliens hiding as humans. No, aliens wasn't the right word. Me and Louis looked to William, our noblest of leaders, and he shrugged. "Okay," he said. Me and Louis nodded as well. We all saw Philip and Mary's parents. It seemed like getting on their bad side would end with a death sentence. "Good," Philip said. He didn't say another word, and Mary was absent-mindedly playing with her perfect braid. I realized that they looked a little bit like angels, like the ones that we learned about in church. Yes, angels was the word I was looking for. It's getting dark out. You two should probably head back home," Louis said, rubbing his neck. We were planning on going to our crevice today. It wasn't cold enough to be dangerous, so William allowed it. "You're going out," Mary commented. "We're boys," Louis retorted. "I'm a boy," Philip said. "We're the outdoorsy type," William responded. "We're all outdoors. Doesn't that make us all outdoors people?" Philip asked. "Are you okay with getting muddy?" William asked. "Sure," Mary nodded. "Your clothes will get ruined. So will yours." William rubbed his forehead for a second before shrugging. They seemed adamant enough. "Maybe we'll hit the crevice another day." Louis patted my shoulder. I was a bit disappointed, but there was nothing a tantrum could do. Besides, it's best if those twins didn't get traumatized. Although they did interrupt our plans, I felt a little pity for them. They were new in town and probably had no friends. "Sorry, what? Crevice?" Philip interrupted, grabbing the sleeve of my shirt. Startled me. The two didn't look like very touchy-feely individuals. I helplessly stared at William, who stared right back at me. There was an earthquake a while back, and it made these big cracks in the ground." Louis chuckled nervously. "There's one we usually go to. Do you guys want to come?" Philip turned to Mary, still not letting go of my shirt, and nodded. Mary nodded as well. "Yes," Mary replied confidently. "Okay, but just a warning. It can be a bit overwhelming." William carefully chose his words. "Okay," Philip nodded eagerly. Okay. Lead the way, Louis." I gestured to my brother. I was feeling embarrassed for some reason. It was a new feeling to have a very beautiful stranger cling onto me like this. I never felt more insecure in my life. Philip had moved his grip from my sleeve to my hand. I couldn't look at him. His hand was very soft. My face flushed. My palms were always calloused. It must have been rough and uncomfortable for him. I tried to tug my hand away, but his grip was stronger than I expected. I eventually gave up. It wasn't hurting me. The walk down the 2 blocks felt different. The twins trailed behind me, Philip's hand still grabbing mine. The smell of winter brushed past us in every gust of wind, the leaves crunching under our shoes. But I felt a sense of dread, of fear. It reminded me of the first time I ever saw a crevice, how my stomach turned and my heart accelerated. I snuck a glance at the two. Both of the children were truly ethereally beautiful. Angels, God's children under the sky. As an old man, I can definitively say that I had never met a more beautiful person than those two. I would never admit it out loud, but it was the truth. Yet, there was something behind those glowing pale eyes that made my stomach sink. It was a strange feeling. I shouldn't have shook my head and carried on. I should have wailed and cried and done something. As we made it to the broken gate, William held it open for Lewis and me. When it came to the twins, all three of us pried the metal apart as much as we could. The two moved elegantly in a sense. They got not even a speck of dirt on them, even though they had to basically crawl on the ground to get through. Philip, once again, latched onto me and smiled politely. I felt my face turn red again. "Now be careful, everyone," Will warned as he carefully stepped through the tall grass. We all followed suit. Naturally, I had no problem walking through this path, but I slowed my pace for Philip's sake. "Sorry, can I?" Mary clasped onto my other hand with a rosy smile. I flushed and shyly nodded. My steps were a lot less adept than usual, and Lewis raised an eyebrow when he saw both of them clinging to me. My face burned as we trudged through the damp grass. I had to catch myself a few times when I slipped on the mud. "Okay, just one thing, Will stepped in front of the three of us. "It's cold and slippery out. Don't get too close. I don't want you to fall in. If you do fall, you better fall feet first, otherwise you're hopeless. Raise up your shoulders to catch yourself. Your arms won't be able to open, and the slopes are too slippery. Don't try to grab anything." Will demonstrated, his shoulders shrugged up. He pointed to both of the twins, who followed his example. "If you can't catch yourself and you fall too deep in, then I'll stay here while my brothers will run home and get help. No matter how tired you get, you shouldn't move. By no circumstances should you fall deeper than you have to," Will warned, his voice stern. I heard this warning before, which came from our father. These rules were brutal but weren't meant to stir fear. There were too many instances to cover our words with sugar and honey. If you slip and you get stuck in too deep, then I'm not sure if we can get you back up. We don't know what these things are. We haven't got a clue. Will finished, his arms crossed. The twins nodded wholeheartedly before their eyes landed to the crack on the ground. They both let go of my hands and went to the edge of the crevice. Will made a noise of discontent when they took a few steps too close. "So no one knows what's at the bottom?" Philip asked. Lewis shook his head. Philip kneeled down and peered over the edge. I heard a small gasp from him, and Mary froze as well. They seemed to be in a trance. I saw Philip's lips contort into a wide smile. Mary touched Philip's shoulder and they looked at each other. Both seemed astounded, but not frightened. "Don't go too close," William called, walking over to pull Philip back. Philip obliged and stepped away, pulling Mary back along with him. I found myself staring at Philip's face. His cheeks were still rosy, his eyes were still glowing. Mary looked a little bit ill, but nonetheless fine. I didn't know if I was supposed to be frightened or impressed. The first time you see a crevice is like the first time you drink hard liquor. It's painful and difficult to manage. Why were their faces not pale with shock? Why was their breathing so calm? "Aren't you scared?" I blurted out. Philip's mouth twitched upwards in a smile. "Oliver," Philip turned to me. "Did I ever introduce myself? Aren't you scared?" He gripped my arms with his pale hands, his blue eyes piercing my very soul. "And no," I replied, a little startled at his question. "No, I felt myself trailing off, a weird feeling coming over me. "Are you?" Philip asked again. I felt myself not able to breathe. My chest began to burn. A wave of feverish warmth washed over me, and I ripped my hands away from Philip's grasp. "Philip!" Mary tugged at his jacket. Philip turned to her. I couldn't see his expression, but the color left Mary's face and she pursed her lips. "Let's go," William quickly said. I found myself walking towards him and grabbing his hand, glancing back at the two with unease. Philip pulled Mary closer to him, cupping his mouth against her ear but barely even attempting to whisper. "Him!" Lewis gently guided me away from the twins, all three of us in a pack, constantly aware of the distance we should make between us and the twins. They didn't have a speck of fear on their faces. Even adults couldn't manage it, how could these kids? I felt my stomach lurch. Something was wrong, but I didn't know what. That night I couldn't sleep. I would close my eyes and count my sheep, yet sleep abandoned me. My throat was dry, so I carefully got out of bed and made my way to the kitchen. I was just about to grab a cup when I heard a noise against the kitchen window. It sounded like someone threw a stone against it. I paused for a second before making my way to the back door. I unlocked it and peered outside. My eye caught a figure standing alone in the backyard. Their glowing blonde hair was muffled in the darkness. "Oliver!" Philip's voice called over. His tone was sweet, nearly even teasing as he waved a hand. "Can you come outside for a second? I want to show you something." Watch each. It's a surprise. My family?" I tried to respond, my voice scratchy. I cleared my throat but still spoke as softly as possible. "My family. My brothers will be worried if I'm not in my room." The moon parted through the clouds and I finally saw Philip's face clearly. His hair was shining like silver. His smile was wide and his eyes were bright. An angel, I thought, will only be gone for a little while. I won't tell if you won't. He put a finger on his lips, his smile growing bigger. I gulped loudly and unconsciously opened the door even more, my feet finding a pair of shoes outside. They were much too big for me, but I pushed that thought to the back of my mind. That feverish warmth was back, but this time I felt relaxed. "How'd you know someone was up at this time? How'd you know it was me?" I asked. "Because I planned for it to be you." Philip ran up to me and grabbed my hand. His hand was cold this time, freezing. I let him guide me out towards the backyard and out of my property. The streets were dark, but they were serene. I didn't know how late it was, but it seemed late enough. My hand was still in Philip's, but instead of feeling flustered as usual, I was more uneasy than anything. As we passed a block, I realized where we were going, and I stopped. "No, Philip. It's dangerous for just two people," I muttered. The boy turned around. My breath caught in my throat. He looked irritated, no, disgusted. He gripped my hand tighter and stepped towards me, his face inches close to mine. "Don't talk back," he said sternly. "God doesn't want you. It just needs a stand-in." He didn't say it in frustration or annoyance, but as a matter of fact. "God? Wait, what?" I whimpered, now being dragged. How could a person be so strong yet look so dainty? I tripped over the shoes that I put on. I was a fool for wearing them. I heard it. I heard its voice. I knew it was here in this town. I heard its faint whispering the second I came. Told me what it wanted. It knew what was happening from the start. Philip began to speak again as we headed to the crevice. "Oliver, it wanted me. It makes sense. I'm an angel, am I not?" Philip turned towards me, his eyes as dazzling as jewels. I felt my face burn. He seemed like he was mocking me, mocking the thoughts I never dared say aloud. "What are you talking about?" I spluttered. "You asked me if I was scared, Oliver. How could I be scared? Oliver, you will help me. A human can't go to heaven without another taking its fall. Oliver, will you get me to heaven?" Philip whispered, his head tilted up towards the sky. He suddenly stopped, his eyes glazed over. "It's not heaven, it's not God, is it? Maybe it is, maybe it isn't. But the voice I heard, the things it told me, it makes me want to sing. If there is a God, what I heard was it. Watch, Oliver. Watch the night sky part and a golden hand take me away to the land of heaven." Philip cried joyously. He reached a hand towards my face and pressed it against my cheek. It was painfully cold. I winced. "You're crazy." I stared at him after a few seconds. Why the hell would God speak to you? I felt myself getting angry. I was still furiously religious at this age. I still was a Christian before anything else, but whatever spoke to Philip. It wasn't anything I knew. God wouldn't do that. I was born, that's why. I'm an angel. God told me so when we were at that crevice. And it told me what it wants. Philip grinned, clutching my hand once more and leading me again. I was confused more than anything. Was he mentally sound? Of course not. If he was, then I wouldn't be here. We got to the gate, and my stomach dropped. It looked like something blew up the gate itself. The wire looked blasted instead of cut. The edges weren't blunt. The pieces of metal were scorched black, like it was set on fire. I unconsciously reached out my free hand and touched it. It was still warm. See? God did this for me. Philip smiled. Isn't he so kind? I didn't say anything. I saw another blonde figure some paces away. Mary, over here, Philip called, his other arm waving in the air. He was distracted. I raised my leg and kicked him square in the back. To my shock, his grip didn't loosen, although he did fall. My feet slid in the two big shoes I had on, and I fell. Philip stared at me with shock, and I pulled his arm towards me, biting hard on his forearm as hard as I could. The taste of blood exploded in my mouth. That's enough. Philip swung back his uninjured fist and slammed it into my cheek. I felt a burning crack and my face hit the floor with a heavy force. The entire right side of my face felt like it was on fire. Philip took me by the collar and dragged me to the ravine. He wasn't even attempting to be gentle, as he finally slumped my body on the edge of the ravine and placed a foot on my back, pressing down hard. My face was hanging over into the crevice. "Get off me!" I screamed, my voice echoing from the ravine. I tried to turn around, but Philip didn't budge. That fear, that wretched fear when I first saw the crevice, it was back and it was pounding on my entire spirit with full force. I tasted bile. "Your brother said, you must fall face down, otherwise you have a chance," Philip recounted. His voice was emotionless, monotone, horrifying. "Mary, help me pick up his legs." I felt Philip grip onto my foot, Mary onto the other. Tears fell from eyes and into the chasm. I tried to kick his hand away, but it was expected that nothing happened. Their grips were like steel. I screamed again, my voice echoing louder, louder, louder. I was wriggling as much as I possibly could, straining all my muscles and clutching the ground, trying my best not to be pushed in. I wasn't going to make it. These two were inhumanely strong. How were they so strong? I couldn't stop crying. My face was stained with dirt and my tears soaked into the ground. "Please, I beg of you, somebody save me." My two large shoes slipped off. Mary lost her balance. Adrenaline filled my entire being. This was a chance that I had to take. I flipped myself around, my foot colliding with Mary's knee, my other leg wriggling out of Philip's grasp as he got distracted. I stood up and shoved past the two, knocking them down. Mary's hand grabbed my ankle and I fell, my chin harshly colliding with the ground. I stared at her beautiful angelic face, splattered with mud and tears, and I kicked with my free leg, my foot slamming against her skull. I heard a sickening crack. Her eyes rolled back into her head. Her face lost its color. She fell back, her head slinking against the edge of the ravine. I kicked at her again, blinded by adrenaline. Her slim figure slipped into the crevice. Philip stared at where she fell. "Mary!" He shrieked, pulling himself to the edge, trying desperately to reach for his sister. "He will get you if you don't get him." I raised my foot back again, smashing it into Philip's side. Another crack. Philip let out a small cry. I lunged at him, pushing him as hard as I could. I wasn't going to die, not by his hands. "Just wait," he whispered, a breath. I heard his body fall into the crack in the ground. I fell back on the ground mere feet away from the edge, tears spilling from my eyes. Fuck, fuck, fuck. I didn't dare approach the crevice. I could hear Philip's wails loud enough. I couldn't tell how deep they were. All I know was that they both fell face down. Fuck. I stared at my shoe, still on the muddy ground. When there is no one, there is God. When there is no one, there is God. When there is no one, what makes you think you are safe? "I have to dash," I mumbled aloud, gripping my hair. I couldn't stop crying. "You think you're safe with your idea of God? Hiding behind white pillars and rosy skies? You think God is a benefactor, a forgiver, a healer? Well, you are alone. But I am here, and I am not God. So what am I? I couldn't stop crying. You begged your God to save your life. Or maybe your God simply decided that two dead was much more interesting than one. Maybe your God was bored after making an earthquake and decided to toy with the people who lived. I shakily got to my feet. I felt bile rising up in my throat, but I held back the want to vomit. Angels are the sweetest when they fall. I stumbled away from the crevice. Don't worry, Oliver, you're safe for now. I have two little angels to entertain me. I ran for my life. I didn't look back. The gate wasn't broken anymore. I slipped through the hole and into the night. When they found the twins' bodies stuck in that crevice, they were mangled, unrecognizable, burnt to a crisp. The Lindens moved out in a hurry, their half-built house remaining for decades to come. I have never believed in God since then. I haven't been in a church for years. I have nightmares of looking up at the ceiling and seeing another dark chasm, that thing really being God. I live in fear of the twins, in fear of myself. I still can't say that I am completely safe. I doubt it. I have no warning for you. You can't be warned. If that thing is God, what could you possibly do? Just play its game. Keep it entertained. Do what it wants. You have no power. As I die here on this bed of mine, I think about what awaits me. Philip and Mary's fates may be one of nightmares, but I think my own will be twice as vile. My cousin once told me a curious thing once. I don't believe in hell, he said. There is no kind of pain that a person can't get used to or even learn to appreciate. I've thought a lot about that. As long as we have the means to perceive our surroundings, we have the capability to appreciate it. If you've been on the internet long enough, you know what kind of absolutely vile things people have come to love. I don't believe I'm any different. Started back in 2016. I worked my second year as a lab assistant for a pharmaceutical company, a large Midwestern one with the blue sunflower logo. Lower end of the pay scale, high end of the benefits kind of gig. I didn't have that much going on in my life. It was just this endless cycle of overtime, sleep, and overtime again. I had an apartment on the 3rd floor, modern place with a huge elevator and reflective glass in the hallways. They had a deal with the company and offered a rent cut for everyone who worked there, making it a sort of corporate hangout spot along with a home. I thought I was going to hate it, but I ended up appreciating it. But there was a fire. I don't know what started it, but it turned the 1st floor into an inferno. I was fresh out of the shower when it happened, barely covering myself with a towel. The alarms blared. It was so quick. You can feel the flames eating the air around you before you feel the heat. A hitch in your throat. It was hot enough for you to get boils by just stepping into the hallway. I tried making my way downstairs, while my neighbor across the hall locked himself in his apartment. Last I saw of him, he and his family peeked at me through a closing door, their eyes reflecting the spreading flames from downstairs. I didn't make it far. Everything looks different in the smoke, and I got turned around. I tried to push forward, but it was too late. I knocked on doors, begging for shelter, but no one answered. I ended up in the corner of the hallway, pushed up against the elevator, feeling the heated metal melt the outer skin off my hand. Your throat closes up. You can see heat build on your arms, boils bursting like poxes. And before you pass out, you dissociate. You don't really believe it's happening. I knew I should have panicked, but I just shrugged it off. It wasn't real. It was like another world, another me. It wasn't happening. Couldn't be happening. I'd never experienced anything like it all my life, so it had to be a hallucination. But that's the thing about experiencing something for the first time. You don't realize what it is. That's the best way I can describe it. Dying. I was only out for a couple of seconds, maybe half a minute, before the firefighters found me. They dragged me out and wrapped me in a blanket. I had second-degree burns all over. Third degree in some places. Those hurt less. It burns through the nerves. You don't feel that until you start to recover. Waking up was unreal. I didn't understand that I'd been bandaged all over my head. I just thought they'd turned off the lights. I couldn't feel a thing, courtesy of a more than generous corporate health insurance and an even more generous dose of morphine. I remember someone talking to me, but I could barely hear them on one side. An eardrum had ruptured, and my left ear had fused to the side of my hairless head. "Oh, thank God," a voice said. "Thank God, you're gonna make it." My little sister, Sammy, she'd flown in from Ottawa. I was in and out of consciousness for days. I had nightmares about pain and anxiety about the drugs wearing off. Sometimes I'd hear machines beeping. Once, a nurse changed a bandage, and it felt like getting my skin torn off. I remember drawing in a breath to scream, and then just gone. Blackout. I get these glimpses of real life sometimes. Someone humming in the hallway, my sister talking on her phone. A beam of light hitting the bandage across my eye, tickling a damaged membrane. I prayed not to feel anything, because I knew that it'd just be more pain. Unbearable, mind-numbing agony. Your body turning inside and out, trying to heal everything at once. Hitting biological dead ends over and over. I think it was night when someone came into my room. They talked to Sammy. They sounded apologetic. She cried. Then, a little later, someone else came into the room. They had something else to say. Her tone changed. "Hope, please," she said. "Whatever it takes." They rolled me into an elevator and then outside. There was a mild breeze that stung like nails on my missing skin. Transport. Sammy calling out in the distance. "We'll take good care of him." The prick of a needle. Couldn't feel a thing. I was out for at least 36 hours. When I came to, I was lying in a hospital bed, looking up at the ceiling. No bandages covering my face. A soft gray membrane covering my left eye. I blinked it away and instinctively raised my arm to wipe it off. My arm was covered in a thick, dark, ink-like substance. It clung to me like a putty, but I could barely feel it. I'd never seen anything like it before. My entire body was covered in it. It was on my face too, even on my eyes. But it worked as a sort of one-way mirror. It didn't block my vision. The closer you looked, the more translucent it was. I was fine. No pain. No restricted movement. Nothing. I sat up, accidentally pulling out a couple of wires from my arm. I looked down at my body, only to see that all covering ink putty dry up and sink into my skin, like morning dew on a dry lawn. Didn't feel a thing. Not even a tickle. A nurse came running just moments later, ready to get to work. Sammy was with her, but when they saw me standing there, it's like there was a cooling breeze seeping through the room. The tensions just melted away. I'd never seen my sister in that state before. Her hair having thinned at the edges of her ear, and the bags under her eyes looking purple. Her face sunken, like she'd forgotten how to smile. But seeing me, she lit up like dawn. She ran up to me with her arms open, but stopped. "Can I hug you?" she asked. "Are you okay?" "I think so," I said. "Yeah." So we hugged, and over her shoulder, I could see a corporate representative waiting for me in the hallway. If you're confused, just know that I was too. We're getting there. Information was spotty at best. Someone threw around a project called Black Bell. The name superadaptive nanoliquid was mentioned a couple of times. Basically, Sammy had given them the go-ahead to try a new treatment. I must have been on the candidate list since I was a loyal worker, and leaking company secrets would not only get me sued but cost me my career. Part of the deal was weekly checkups and participating in their trials. I could quit if I wanted to, but chances were that I'd go right back to that hospital bed if the treatment wasn't completed. I didn't really have a choice, but I didn't blame them for it. They had their own interests to look out for, and I'd been given this amazing opportunity. I could walk right out of there. That's worth an NDA. Coming back to the office a couple weeks later, there were some people talking about me. They said the treatment had been developed in one of our branch labs in Vietnam. It had been mentioned in a couple of memos as something tested in relation to vacuum treatment and low oxygen environments. I'd seen it too, but had no idea it had regenerative properties. I mean, you can read something on paper, but seeing it in action is another thing entirely. Most people didn't believe I'd really been in a fire. They thought I'd been taking time off, riding the coattails of an accident that consumed my apartment. I could have shown them pictures, but that would somehow made it even more unbelievable. I decided to let them think whatever they wanted. The higher-ups knew the truth, and that was all that mattered. So slowly, but surely, I got back into that endless cycle of overtime and sleep. Sammy was sticking around for a while to make sure I managed, but apart from that, it was business as usual. Of course, what you see on the surface isn't always telling the whole story. I'd stay up at night imagining that excruciating pain writhing just underneath the skin. What if there was a hiccup in the treatment or some kind of side effect? Could all of it really come back? Could one wrong step send me back to the hospital bed? I'd lose hours of sleep worrying, looking up at the ceiling of my new bedroom, closing my eyes, but not sleeping, still feeling the heat of the flames, licking my skin, the hair on my arms curling up to die, little parts of me blending with the ashes, the smell of my own flesh cooking. I couldn't stop thinking about it. I was 2 weeks into my new routine when I had my first panic attack. Someone brought in a birthday cake to work, and they blew out the candles over lunch. There was something about the faint glow of fire reflecting on their skin that sent a spiral of thoughts rushing through me. Heat. My pulse ran away from me. I could imagine my skin trying to sweat, but the pores being melted shut. The pain I imagined wasn't real, but the memories it brought on sent it all to the forefront of my mind. I politely declined a piece of cake and ran to the bathroom. I threw up and curled into a corner, forcing my eyes shut. But no matter how hard I tried, I felt the pain, a mild heat latching onto me, burying itself in my skin. You can't think away a panic attack. You just have to ride it out and wish the next one is shorter. Talking to Sammy about it over dinner, she decided to stick around for a few more weeks. I hadn't asked her to do it, but she was happy to. She'd made baked potatoes. I'd forgotten to buy new cutlery and plates, so we had to settle for paper plates and plastic forks. A single naked light bulb hung overhead. "You talk in your sleep, you know," she mentioned as the oven dinged. "I hear it through the walls." "What do I say?" "It's not really words, it's just like sounds," she said. "Long, drawn-out vowels. But it kind of sounds like words. I'll try to keep it down." She gave me an apologetic look. She knew I couldn't control it, and she knew I couldn't try even if I wanted to. But it was a nice thought. It got worse, though. I would have nightmares and wake up choking. I'd feel my skin getting warmer at night. My anxiety would pop off at seemingly random times, kicking me out of whatever comfort zone I'd managed to make for myself. Could strike fast and stick around all day. After a while, it was more unusual for me to have a good day than a bad one. Coming home from work one day, I stopped at a light. I sat in my car, hands on the wheels, seeing the light turn red as I came to a full stop. The radio jockey chuckled about putting on some classic dad rock for a caller and put on Kiss with the song Hotter Than Hell. It's a nice song, but it put my mind in an uncomfortable place. I stared at that red light, hoping I wouldn't see the yellow light. Something about the glow of it put me right back there in the hallway, squirming around on the floor. The meat on my hand getting cooked on the surface of the heated metal elevator door. I closed my eyes and felt something. A soft cooling coat expanded across my skin. The treatment, it was still there. I remember someone honking. Maybe the light had turned green, but I couldn't risk looking. Couldn't open my eyes. Maybe it would hurt. Maybe it had all turned dark. 100 maybes. Locking my hands on the steering wheel and keeping my eyes closed. Then a flicker. It's like I manifested it. A spark reacting with my skin. Fire. It must have looked like an explosion. All the air getting sucked out at once, breaking the windows. The car popped from the released pressure as the entire car lit up. Ungodly pain. Couldn't scream. A single flame danced on my eyes as they fused shut. Nerve endings exploded with agony as the bones on my knuckles exposed themselves to the open air. It happened so fast, like someone shutting off the lights inside your mind, one by one. Sight, smell, hearing, taste, touch, thought. You can't breathe, there is no air. You don't know what you're doing, you can't feel yourself. Are you standing up? Sitting down? Impossible to tell. They say I was completely engulfed in flames for a solid 2 minutes before a passerby managed to pull me out of the wreckage. They said I was covered in a black liquid, which they thought was motor oil. I was dropped onto the pavement, and the flames were put out by bystanders. The treatment kept me alive through all of it. Alive but suffering. Kept me on the edge of life, not allowing me to cross over, and the agony stuck with me for what felt like an eternity. But eventually the sirens came. The EMTs would never hear of what would be a second miraculous burn victim recovery. I'd walk out of that hospital a couple of days later without any questions asked. The treatment put me right back to square one, perfect physical condition, with a couple of mental asterisks. While the firefighters didn't understand what had happened, the corporation did. Apparently, my ceaseless obsession with fire was triggering an adaptive reaction. Basically, I was tricking myself. By thinking so much about burning, it became the normal state of being, and the treatment adapted to it. It basically thought I wanted to burn, so it set me on fire. At least that's how it was explained to me. Knowing the cause of the issue helped, but also not. It's hard to put yourself in a state of mind where you're not allowing yourself to think certain things. It's like biting your nails or picking your nose. Thinking of how you can't do it makes it worse. Knowing that thinking too much about this one thing might cause a fire was as all-consuming as the flames themselves. Sammy didn't leave me though. She figured out a couple of things we could do to alleviate stress. For example, I could start sleeping in the bathtub, and we could remove anything flammable.
No drapes, no plastics.
We also kept a fire blanket nearby. It was uncomfortable, but you can get used to anything. It was nice to know that it was there in case I needed it, a precaution. Puts you at ease, and you stop obsessing over it as much. I go to weekly checkups. They had me fill out forms, rating sensations and experiences on scales from 1 to 10 and rarely to often. A lot of it was generalized questions, but a couple of them were specifically made for me. These questions didn't have a standard answering sheet. There'd be some overpaid academic listing off questions with a nonchalant smile. Every week, a different smile, but the same attitude. I got the impression that I wasn't the only one testing this treatment. The questions they asked implied that others were having trouble as well, but in completely different ways. Multiple choice questions like, how often do you forget to breathe? How often do you forget to sleep? How much has your sense of touch diminished? With possible answers ranging from hourly to monthly. I made more adjustments in my everyday life. Fire blankets, extinguishers. Once I filled the tub with water before sleeping, as I felt an episode coming on. The ink would seep out of my skin to keep me from going hypothermic. It really was adaptive. Sammy did her best to help, but something she said stuck with me. As I was heading to work, she took some time cleaning out the tub. I asked her if she was okay doing that. It's not that different from changing bandages, she said. You gotta adapt either way. At least there's no pain, right? Trauma seeps into you like a poison. The bad days become the new normal, and the good days become this impossible ideal you strive to get. That perfect day without that sinking feeling in your chest, where you can sleep a little longer without waking up tired, where you can say you had a nice dream and can afford to put some effort into caring for yourself. Have that extra long shower, the freshly pressed clothes. But I couldn't do that. I'd be balancing on the edge, ready to burst into flames. I wouldn't wear my best clothes. I'd stay in the tub at night. I would keep my distance from my sister and my coworkers. All these little things you do to keep yourself from becoming a problem. And even then, things would spiral out of control. It happened once as I was going from the supermarket to my car. I don't even know what made me snap. Suddenly, it was all just fire. I burned all my groceries and was left exposed in the parking lot, covered in ash and writhing in pain. It was a short enough burn for my nerves to stay, making me feel every boil and crack in the skin. Blood and soot on the concrete. The most embarrassing time it happened was at work. I felt it coming, and I hid in the bathroom again. As the flames burst out, the fire alarm tripped. Sprinklers came on. I got a nasty burn, but not as bad as the other times. I could still walk out of there. I draped myself in a jacket and had to walk out in front of all my coworkers, naked from the waist down and covered in boils. After that, I was put on paid leave while my treatment continued. We were going to work out an action plan with a therapist, but they had some trouble getting one that was accessible at this level of corporate secrecy. So while it dragged on, all I could do was wander around and try my best not to think of something that could burn my house down at a moment's notice. It was getting to me, and I suspect to Sammy as well. One night, it happened in the bath. I had an awful dream, which shook me right awake. The bathroom was pitch black. Despite my eyes being open, it was dark, that it spiraled into this thought of my eyes having fused shut. It pushed that first domino in my chest, and by the time I got out of the bath, I was on fire, casting crawling shadows along the walls. Sammy came running. She tried to help but ended up burning her hands. I pushed her away, giving her another burn on her neck. I pulled myself into the bath and turned on the water. It's hard to do when you don't have any skin on your fingers. Blood is slippery, and the knobs in the shower can be a bit finicky. The fire alarm was going crazy, but Sammy managed to turn it off. Concerned neighbors came knocking at the door, and she had to turn them away with a bleeding neck and hands. And I just lay in the bath, watching the last embers on my skin disappear, putting me back in the soothing dark. I locked the door, begging for the night to be over. Things got complicated after that. Of course, Sammy didn't want to leave, but the bandages on her neck and hands broke my heart. The way she winced as she made herself a peanut butter jelly sandwich, the salt stinging her wounds. I lied to her and said the company was bringing over a live-in care provider. It wasn't completely untrue. It had been discussed. In passing, I waved goodbye to Sammy from the kitchen window. A cab drove off with her, and I could finally relax. She was out of harm's way. My way. I tried to deal with my anxiety in other ways. I went out a lot. Booze helps a bit, especially if there's a lot of distractions. Live bands playing loud music. Pretty girls waving their long hair around. Anything to get the finger in your mind away from that first domino that sends you spiraling into oblivion. I thought I could make something fun out of it. Once when I got really drunk, I tried showing it as a party trick to a couple of barflies. They thought I was kidding around, that I was some kind of fire breather or something. So when I willingly set myself on fire, they were horrified. They didn't know about my treatment, so when the dark ink covered my skin, it looked like I'd been turned into coal. Their eager twisted as they ran screaming back into the bar. One of them called the police. Another fainted. They covered their noses, trying not to breathe in my fumes. I locked my knees into place, forcing my body to stay upright past the snapping musculature. My head dangled as my neck gave out. I fell face first into a puddle, but the treatment stopped me from suffocating. An inch of water, and it would have killed me. By the time a patrol arrived, I was long gone, leaving my tattered clothes in a black pile. I knew the roads well enough. I didn't care anymore. Coming home that night, I considered my options. I could keep going down this path, hoping something would change. Or I could struggle and kick my way through a life lived on the precipice of pain. No matter what I did, there'd always be that fear brewing in the back of my mind, reminding me that I was never far away from the gates of my own hell. I sat on my balcony for a while, looking up at the stars. There was something beautiful there, a kinship. They burned too, but they hadn't known another life. Perhaps that was the way to go. The next day, I took my car and drove into the desert. I parked and left a note. No valuables. I hid the keys under the front tire, stripped down, and put my clothes under the hood. There was no point in them getting burned. I wanted a fresh pair when I got back. If I got back, then I walked. I felt the sun on my skin, and I sensed the heat boiling at the edge of my mind. "Come on," I muttered. "Come on." I made myself think of it. I forced myself into it. I kicked myself down the black spiral in my mind and let the impressions take over. "Come on," I begged. "Get it over with." And when the flames came, I was relieved. I just let it happen. The fires burning my eyes shut and sucking the air out of my lungs. My body crackling and popping, breaking at the seams with every twist and turn. Your senses disappear. You can't scream. And with the treatment keeping me alive, I locked myself in a spiraling struggle as my body was repaired and burned over and over. Acrid flesh, ammonia, and burnt hair coming and going as my sense of smell circled. Flashes of light as my corneas struggled to remain. A violent tinnitus coming and going, like a screaming wave crashing into my skull. Never-ending pain, the kind of agony where a second turns into lifetimes. But it was too late. There was no one coming to save me. What had I done? You don't really taste anything. There might be little spots of blood leaving an impression of iron on your tongue. But it came and went. Same with touch. It would be pain or nothing. After a while, I stopped trying to breathe. I let my throat stay closed, and the treatment would keep me alive. I would feel my heart slowing, adapting. I realized that if I was calculated, I could make micro-movements in bouts of muscular repair. Meaning if I tried long enough, I could move, but only so slightly. I remember laying in the sand. The flashes of light were darker. It must have been night. I'd managed to move my hands straight into view, so I could see my own fingers. There'd be darkness, a little light from the moon, a flash of clarity, showing a coal-wrapped skeletonized hand. Liquidized boiled fat staining the black sands around me. I tried to think, but even my brain was affected. There'd be long stretches of time where I sensed this gate in the back of my head, barring me from chasing any complicated thoughts. I couldn't remember my name. I could just think of something short and immediate, bursts of effort and strain. As my lungs came and went, I could think of sounds to make. Vowels, mostly. I settled on a couple that I found easy to repeat, just to remind myself that I was alive. E and O sounded particularly nice. Yo, yo, yo. As I couldn't see or hear anything, my mind started to fill in the blanks. The waves of painful screeching in my ear started to sound like voices and music. The flickering lights began to look like angels. I would have conversations with them, and the pain would lull into a background noise, a nuisance at most. I'd have these presences sit down next to me. One had a voice like a beautiful piano, talking sonatas that would make me weep. Another would lie down next to me and wrap their arms around me, their breath on my neck like a soothing wind. They'd whisper of beautiful places in far-off lands, a beach where no one is alone, an island paradise where the sands are pink, a tree that reaches for the moon wanting to go home, little stories and melodies playing in the fire, begging me to stay. I could feel my needs melting away. When you're at the bottom of every sensation, there's no point in trying to look up. What's a glass of water when your world is on fire? What's a night of sleep when you're living in a nightmare? I let it all go, embracing the pain. It was so easy. After a while, I realized I could direct my efforts like managing a switchboard. Keep the eyes off, I'd think. Keep the eyes and the ears off. Instead, I'd focus on the muscles, keeping me at intense pain levels but allowing me to move, to touch. I don't know if anyone saw me. I don't think they did. But if anyone had seen me, they'd have seen a charred body rise from the ashes, facing the moon. I'd wander the sands, inviting the pain into the soles of my feet. I didn't care about stepping on branches or rocks. I'd feel the wind fanning the flames, fueling me like an engine. The more I moved, the more it hurt, and the more I could keep going. And as I moved, air would push into my lungs, leaving me with enough room to scream. And with that, I'd howl at the moon like a beast, yo, yo, yo. Time would pass and it wouldn't. Your days don't really start or end. It all just keeps going. What was real and what wasn't would be blurred, making me chase thoughts I didn't know I had. I'd make up words that even a burned mouth could say, borrowing meaning from whispers in the fire. Words with depth and power that I'd forget in a second. Or an hour. There was no way to tell. I would imagine other burning people walking alongside me. Sometimes I would see them dancing at the edge of my vision. Long, elegant movement with trails of smoke puffing into the sky. Little lights allowing themselves to burn out and die. I cry for them, laugh at them, and all the while I suffered. But that was normal. I'd fall to my knees and stay there, smoldering, not moving an inch. I'd give in to the thoughts that trickled into sparks of consciousness, becoming a conduit to whatever spoke through me. Vowels trickling past broken teeth. A prayer, perhaps. My most vivid memory is that moment when I'm kneeling in the sand. Even with my eyes closed, I could tell I wasn't in our world anymore. I was in a world of fire, praying to an ocean of molten steel. Another dead man propped up to suffer. Yo, yo, yo. The burning angels would listen and dance. The ocean of pain would soothe me. There was no heat anymore, it was home. I'd finally reached the other side of the shore, where pain was life, and being without it was agony. I'd adapted. I'd learned. I'd been perfected, and I came home. I opened my eyes. They'd followed me through. A dozen others, wielding the same black ink across their bodies. They'd adapted too. They'd been made tall and strong and mad. They'd wandered other worlds, exposed to other horrors, and they'd been made grateful, just like me. Brothers, sisters, a family carved from agony and blisters. I'd go from ecstasy to ceaseless horror. It felt like time had stopped, and that I was settling into a strange eternity, one where complete inaction was the only logical thing to pursue, turning myself static. I could feel what that first fire had felt, warming our ancestors. I was on the wrong side of life, looking out at those struggling. I was beyond them, but something in me was still too human to accept it. But I was getting there, and it was so comfortable. A life without worries means a life without drive. But is that such a bad thing? Then a drop of water. I didn't feel the first one, but as the rain gathered, the flames died. I'd been in pain so long that being without it made me sick. All those little systems of my body that I'd forgotten or cast away, coming back to me. Eyes, ears, taste, each and every one more terrible than the other. I cried and begged the heavens to send me back, but I was forgetting the right words, and the broken spots in my brain were coming back to me. The heavens couldn't hear me, and I couldn't make them listen. I lay there for hours, hoping I would dream myself back to that other world, where I belonged. But I'd lost it. My car had been towed. People had looked for me, but they hadn't found me. All in all, I figured I'd been gone for a couple of days at most. Turns out it was 16 days in total. A lot of people thought I'd been kidnapped or killed, and for the second time in less than a year, Sammy would see me come back from the dead. The treatment was deemed too dangerous. They didn't specify why. Maybe the discussion with the therapist got a little out of hand when I started to talk about ink-covered angels. Or maybe it was my desire to put myself back on fire. Either way, they had a kill switch to deactivate the entire thing, and they used it. Made me cough up something akin to a metal glob. They put it on a metal tray and moved it to a liquid nitrogen container with a stylized blue sunflower logo. It was strange, looking at the treatment like a separate physical thing. It had been part of me, and losing it felt like removing a vestigial organ. I know I should have felt different once it was off, but I didn't. I still had the same thoughts, the same problems, But now that I thought about the fires, I didn't know whether to long for them or cower in fear. Maybe both. At least I didn't have to worry about hurting anyone. I was still on paid leave. I moved in with Sammy for a while just to get a change in environment. I met some new people and grounded myself a bit. It's so easy to lose sight of the little things when your mind is in 10 different places. Sometimes you don't need much to make your day. A pat on the shoulder, a cool drink after a long day. The little things can do wonders. I eventually made my way back home. I returned to the office. I got a new place that didn't have a bathtub. I started talking to people without shying away, and I'd keep my eyes on the traffic lights when I came to a full stop. I crossed the line where pain didn't scare me anymore. When you have known what I know, everything else seems dull in comparison. And if push comes to shove, I've lived through the worst of it. I wouldn't mind seeing it again someday. This was years ago, and my life looks very different today. I'm engaged and I live in a new town. New job, same company. I got a dog. But even now, as all things lull into a new normality, I think of those days. On the darkest nights, I can picture those ink-covered beings out there, watching over me from afar, waiting for me to remember and come home. I fear I might still have a part of me stuck in that place, that someday I'll just snap. And I don't know what's worse, to be paralyzed by fear or to long for it. Much like my cousin, I don't believe in hell. I don't think we can suffer forever, and sometimes when it rains, I long to burn. I came to work at the Church of St. Anselm to escape everything. At the time, I thought a quiet position as a caretaker in a small town would give me room to breathe, a chance to forget. I wasn't religious, but there was something in the calm of this place that touched me deep inside. Maybe it was the soothing silence of the pews or the way sunlight filtered through the antique stained glass, like the breath of God. I just needed quiet, and the church had plenty of it. The church is located in Merriwick, a godforsaken town in upstate New York, lost among thick forests and forgotten highways. The people here are polite but guarded, the way folks tend to be in small towns. They're never rude, but they don't ask questions either. No one asked why a 30-year-old guy from the big city moved into the church house. They were just glad someone was finally taking care of the place. St. Anselm had stood empty for many years. The previous caretaker, an old man named Grady, had died under strange circumstances. No one knew the exact cause. Some said heart failure, others claimed he simply walked off and never came back. I didn't press the issue. I wasn't particularly curious. The church was old, built back in the 19th century, with creaky floors and drafts in the hallways. The bell tower hadn't worked in years, and the wooden pews had been polished to a shine by countless hands. But the most disturbing thing, the thing that unsettled me the most, were the icons. There were too many of them. Not just the usual crucifixes and stained glass depictions of saints that everyone's used to, but large painted panels hung in odd places. Beside the doors, above the confessional, even at the foot of the pulpit. They were old, clearly brought from far away. Eastern Orthodox in style, with flat, wide-open eyes and severe expressions. My whole life, this kind of art always gave me the sensation that I was being watched. Even if I knew I wasn't, it still made me deeply uneasy. I'm no expert, but it didn't take a scholar to realize how strange it was to find icons like this in a Catholic church in rural America. They didn't belong here, that's what I thought. And maybe I didn't either. Then the strangeness began. At first, I blamed it on adjustment. I was alone in a massive old building, full of creaks and groans. I thought I heard whispering now and then, but chalked it up to fatigue and sleepless nights, until the icons started to change. At first, it was barely noticeable. One morning, I saw red spots on the spear of St. George near the entrance. My first thought was paint. Maybe it had always been that way and I just missed it. But then the eyes of the Virgin Mary on the icon near the stairs to the rectory began to shine, not from the light, but as though with tears. I bent down and stared at the image for a long time before touching the wood. Goosebumps ran down my arms when I realized it was damp. I wiped the surface, deciding there must be a leak in the wall. But the next day it happened again. The moisture was only on her face, as if the wood itself was crying. A week after I arrived, I woke around 3 in the morning. The house was dead silent, except for a faint rustling, like claws scraping stone. I assumed it was something in the walls, until I realized the sound was coming from the church itself. I threw on a sweater and padded barefoot across the cold floor. There was no need for light. Moonlight poured in, bathing the hallway in silver. When I stepped into the sanctuary, the air changed. Subtly but unmistakably, it smelled like the charged air before a storm. The pews were cloaked in shadow, and the icon of Saint Sebastian by the altar looked darker than usual. His wounds, tiny arrows in his chest, appeared fresh and wet. I swear on everything I have, they were bleeding. I stood frozen for 10 minutes, the metallic scent of blood in my nostrils. Then came the rustling again, louder and rhythmic now, from the direction of the altar. I moved forward, mouth dry, a lump in my throat. I rounded the pulpit, and everything fell silent. I looked behind the altar. Nothing.
No rats, no fallen stones.
Just a wooden cross and the icons. One of them made my heart stutter. A grim monk with eyes like black voids, holding a book inscribed with red symbols. I had never seen it before. When I turned on the lights, the icon was gone. I couldn't sleep for the rest of the night. Things got worse in the days that followed. The icon of Christ in the sanctuary began to change expression. His once serene mouth twisted into a deep scowl. His eyes followed me, not metaphorically, but literally. I tested it, pacing from side to side. They tracked me. One day, from the choir loft, I saw his hand raised in a gesture that hadn't been there before. 2 fingers lifted in blessing or warning. I kept telling myself it was all in my head. Maybe I was losing it. I'd gone through some sad, heavy shit in my life. Maybe it had cracked something inside me. I was too alone. That's what I thought. Until the dreams started. Too vivid, so much that I sometimes wondered if I was dreaming at all. I'd wake up drenched in sweat, heart pounding, unsure if I was still asleep. It was always the same place. The church lit by candles. Icons covered every surface, walls, ceiling, even the floor, and they whispered in a language I didn't understand. The rhythm of the words felt like a heartbeat. The Virgin's face contorted in grief. Peter gnawed at his own hands. Christ's wounds bled, flooding the air with the metallic stench. The worst part was that when the icons changed in the dreams, they changed in reality too, becoming increasingly grotesque and terrifying. At the end of each dream, the monk from the vanished icon appeared, standing at the foot of my bed, book in hand, his mouth sewn shut with black thread. He'd point a bony finger at me, and that's when the dream would end. Not with waking, but with my scream. I wanted to quit. This wasn't what I signed up for. I told Father Bellamy, the parish priest, that I was feeling overwhelmed. I told him about the dreams, about what I saw in the church. He gave me a strange look. Not pity, but understanding. He didn't try to talk me out of it. He just asked one question. "Have you opened the box in the sacristy?" "What?" He walked away without another word, leaving me stunned. That night, I found the box. I hadn't noticed it before. Built into the base of a cabinet in the sacristy, hidden behind a false panel. Inside was a folder filled with yellowed pages, notes, sketches of a strange religious nature, and a journal. Grady's journal. I read the first few entries, my hands trembling uncontrollably. The icons came from Russia, donated supposedly in 1912 by a visiting bishop. But something's wrong with them. I know Orthodox art. These aren't just images. They're prisons. They're vessels. I hear them at night, whispering, sometimes crying. The Virgin begs me to release her. Sebastian howls in agony. Christ weeps blood. They're trapped in eternal suffering. I found a ritual to cleanse them, but it requires blood. Mine won't work. It has to be a good soul. I just can't do it. Forgive me, Lord. I dropped the journal and doubled over, my stomach heaving. I nearly vomited. The next morning, I drove into town to demand answers from Father Bellamy. He wasn't surprised. He invited me into his office, poured us both whiskey. The room was crammed with books, ancient, leather-bound tomes that looked more occult than theological. "You're the first to last more than a month," he said, sipping calmly. "You and Grady." That old man held on for years, until the end. I showed him the journal. He nodded. "We've known for a long time. The icons never should have come here. They were created during a famine by a cult that believed saints could absorb human suffering, literally. They poured their torment into the paintings, starved themselves, killed their own, fed the icons, sealing them with prayer and blood. And who brought them here? The bishop who donated them burned in a fire a few weeks later. No one knows who really sent them, but it was already too late. The church accepted them, and now they can't be removed. Every time someone tries, something terrible happens. Plague, fire, madness. We stopped trying. One local man tried to destroy the icon of the Holy Trinity. He vanished, and a new icon appeared, one we'd never seen before. "And you just live with this?" He looked at me with hollow eyes. "What else can we do? They're part of the building now, like rot in the bones. We are doomed, my son." I left, my body shaking with the weight of it. What terrified me wasn't what he said, but how calmly he said it. I tried to run, packed a bag, booked a motel, planned to head south. But the road was blocked. Fallen tree. People said it was a storm. I didn't believe them. I tried leaving on foot through the forest, walked for hours, but always ended up back in town. Asking the locals for help was useless. They just looked at me with despair. A couple times, when I thought I was escaping, a blinding migraine would paralyze me in seconds. I'd black out and wake up in the church house. When I finally dared to re-enter the church, the icons had changed again. They were all staring at me, not with judgment, but their gaze made my skin crawl. They knew I tried to leave. The nightmares got worse. The monk began to speak, his mouth no longer sewn shut, his voice like cracking ice underfoot. "You live where they rest. Feed them, or take their place. Try to destroy them, and join me." The sounds came during the day now, scratching beneath the floorboards, moaning in the walls. I opened a vent and found a bundle wrapped in cloth. What I saw nearly gave me a heart attack. A severed human hand, clutching a crucifix twisted into a spiral. I stopped sleeping. The church began to change. Hallways leading nowhere. Rooms that hadn't existed before. Doors locking themselves. Once, I found stairs behind the pulpit leading into darkness. The next day they were gone, and the icons kept weeping, bleeding and moving. I started hearing voices while awake, begging, screaming, sometimes laughing. Someone whispers my name. Others promise release if I obey. I couldn't live like that. I saw the sword of Archangel Michael rust before my eyes. Thick, syrupy liquid dripped from the blade. Blood poured from the crucifix. The Holy Trinity icon. All three angels stared directly into my soul. I brought a sledgehammer at night, stood before the crying Virgin and raised it. Her face changed. The tears stopped, and for the first time since I arrived, she smiled. I dropped the sledgehammer and ran. That was last week. Now something is coming. I feel it. The church is hungry. At night, the icons pulse. Paint moves like living flesh. I see hands behind the surfaces, pushing, tearing, trying to break free. I understand now what the monk meant. They need a soul, a willing one, someone to suffer for them, to become one of them, to become the new icon. Grady resisted, but he broke. I don't know if I'll be any stronger. I started painting. I don't know why. I just looked at the paints Grady left, and my hands started to move. I draw faces I've never seen but that feel familiar. I couldn't draw before. Now the brush moves on its own. Some of the faces look like mine. I see my reflection in the glass covering the icons. The eyes don't move. The mouth doesn't match mine. It's almost over for me, like it was for Grady and the others. My calls to the police go unanswered. No one picks up. I've realized I'm stuck here. I'll never get out alive. If you ever find this church, run. Don't even think of going inside. No one deserves to become part of this place. Not even me. Last summer, my family went on a trip to Acadia National Park in Maine. On our last night in the area, my stepdad and I decided to go try to get some photos of the stars. Something happened out there. I can't make sense of it. From what I can remember, the night had been warm with a sappy heat that came down from the mountain and crawled through the cabin door frame. The canopy of spruce, cedar, and hemlock holding back what little it could. A shrill, desolate darkness spread like nightshade over the setting July sun. A warning. With my mom and my sister sound asleep, the three of them read with exhaustion after the steep climb up and the subsequent climb down from Cadillac Mountain. Only my stepdad, Tom, and I were left awake, camera shutters fixating on different edges of the shore just down the gravel path of the KOA. The park was just across the western bay from the park, the endless expanse of the wooded peninsula a phantom within the fog that had swept over the water, and our cameras could hardly focus on the shoreline, long gone dark from the headlights on the park loop. Sat alongside the window, Tom peeked through the blinds, fidgeting with a wide aperture lens. I bet we could catch some great shots of the stars tonight. City has a mandate not allowing streetlights after dark light pollution and the animals or something, he mumbled. You think? I wondered, peering back to their bedroom where Mom had long since begun snoring, the prospect sifting in my thoughts. My legs were beaten from the hike. The long day still stung my neck, where the camera strap striped me in a pattern of red and ivory. I estimated the idea in my head. I was not quite tired but unsure, without an aperture lens of my own, if it would do me any good to try. Then again, I considered when I would be in Maine again. All right, I nodded. Let's do it. With careful steps, Tom lifted the car keys from the round dining table. The surface littered with postcards, souvenirs, and a pair of stuffed otters that the girls had demanded and eventually forgotten about. While I filled my backpack with my camera and flashlight, we both knew the mosquitoes would be in a united garrison that night. Before we slipped out into the darkness, we buckled our jeans. We rolled down our sleeves before leaving without another word. Outside, the belligerent heat of the day was already waning in excess. A serene Atlantic breeze instead rustling the dreary trees and polyester tents that were scattered throughout the park. The sleepy little coastal site had already put out its fires, and only the indistinct muttering of sleepless campers polluted the air outside the whistle of the night. As I tested whether the camera could focus on a thing in this blackness, Tom guardedly locked the sleeping half of our family snugly and soundly in the paltry cabin. Parked just next to the short staircase from the porch, the rental minivan softly sputtered awake in a groan. Too late to turn back now. As we turned onto the back road from the campsite that would take us straight to the park loop entrance, the only light beyond our headlights was the dash, the time illuminated in a pale lime color at 9:30. Let's keep the cabin keys in the car. Your mother will lose her mind if we lose these. That'll or we'll be locked out until we wake her up to let us in. I chuckled, my eyes scanning ahead to the road, revealing itself out of the void as we sped down towards the park. Up ahead, Tom spotted the long, rotted, and vacant derelict barn in a rare empty field devoid of towering forest that we'd passed after dinner in town that evening. There's that barn, so eerie at night. We should also get some shots of you in there later with our red lights. He pointed, the barn suddenly in and lost to the black again before I could even focus on it. Yeah, let's absolutely hang out in the creepy barn. I huffed. I have never seen this kind of darkness before. Makes you appreciate streetlights, huh? Tom chuckled, focused ahead on the road, from the passenger seat. The edge of the woods that swallowed up either side of us was less of a certainty than an assertion of instinct and memory, and it was an uneasy one. The only thing I could make out between the passing trees was my reflection. Just us and the dark. Yeah, there was a complete absence of life as we rolled through the open park gates. There were no parked cars along the curb or sudden hikers on the road for us to jump at. Just nothing, us, the road, a son, a father, and a peninsula possessed by the blanket of night. Up ahead, the darkness was absorbed into the amorphous mist that had settled over the New England hardwoods, the car slowing to a crawl at 30 miles an hour, for at this point, it was simply too dark to drive any faster safely. Any animal, whether a family of campers or starving coyotes, would not need to lurch in front of the car to catch us off guard. We could hardly see a thing. Where to first? I pulled the map up on my phone, the blue flash from its screen blinding me as my eyes adjusted slowly to the natural light. Any parking lots nearby? Probably our best bet to get a good clearing. Yeah, this one should be in about a mile or so here. As the drive progressed, the familiarity of the park we had spent the last 3 days exploring and photographing became an increasingly distant memory, some abstract idea of a place it did not feel like we were in anymore. Under the dim lamp of the moon, the valleys and mountains that made up the peninsula were a stranger. One that, as I saw less and less of civilization just a few miles out, I was so sure was welcoming us with open arms. No longer were we the nuclear family braving the highly regulated, densely populated trails on a summer vacation. Now we were just two strangers, trespassers, entering the arms and jaws of the wild. We were out past curfew and the forest knew. "Here'll do," Tom said, driving the gear into the park and pulling the keys out, dropping the spool of Swiss Army knives he had attached and keys far from their locks beside the cabin keys. 10 p.m. On the floor beside my shoes, the soles of which were torn from use, a park pamphlet lay dirty and ripped. Experience through knowledge adorned the brochure. Some use it was, I had thought, my sisters, in all their adventures and potential knowledge, could hardly make it past the first mile before all knowledge was left behind for the comfort of air conditioning. They were young. I could hardly blame them for not sharing my recent obsession with the outdoors that had brought us here. Little legs and all that. Tom had already begun preparing his camera, turning the lens into place, unzipping his camera bag that had drifted aimlessly in the back seat during the drive through the winding Park Loop Road. His bald head was a spotlight from the interior lights, drowning out the outside in its entirety. All that could be seen from inside the car were two photographers prepared to capture the Milky Way if the clouds held up. "Got your light?" He motioned to my bag, and I nodded. "Yeah." I reached down into my backpack, the assortment of crinkled road trip snacks murmuring from the caverns of the canvas bag, blinding myself as I pulled out the light already lit. Before I could even unclip my seatbelt, Tom poured out of the driver's seat, his headlamp fluttering about in manic darts. He could hardly contain his excitement to be out here. No kids begging to return to the car, just his son along for the ride, someone who learned to love photography from him. He got to work immediately, and it was undoubtedly a particular process. The framing and exposure had to be right to pick up the number of stars that even our own eyes couldn't see. How they couldn't see all of it, I'll never know. Above our heads was a galaxy, a great band stretching in a thunderbolt of orange and purple, all the light we would need, the luster of life of the universe, infinite. It was God, or as close as I had come to know it. Standing in an empty parking lot, the ocean just a few hundred feet beneath us, down a rocky cliffside of shrubs and dirt, I looked up and saw only a torch, a lightning bolt candle in the dark resting on the window into our world. It was the sight that made you understand what it all must be for, that surely, before we had a word for a star, why we looked up, Tom hooped and hollered, his body flat against the concrete ground beneath us, rolling onto his back to watch as the camera captured everything we couldn't pick out in the boundless sea of everything. And eventually, I did too, laying back to the ground, camera off but wrapped entirely by what I'd never seen. He could capture it as he pleased. I could not help but marvel, to wonder. Around us, dog-day cicadas whistled between the howling wind to the world above the world, the ceaseless glory of the whole shooting match. Then the cicadas stopped. It had taken me a moment to notice the sudden end of the familiar soundscape of a midsummer night. But when I did, I pulled away from the universe and remembered the forest. The parking lot, unnecessarily large as it was bordered by the inevitable tree line of untouched fauna and greenwood, and the cicadas that resided there had gone silent all at once. I could not help but stare. My flashlight pointed towards it, a pool of turbid nothing, but there was something out there. It was a national park, after all. Anything could be watching, confused or annoyed at the humans who disturbed their sleep. Yet, as the wind grew sharp and blaring, I could not take my eyes away from the edge. I wasn't scared, no. I wasn't my sisters. I had outgrown a fear of the dark. There was celestial light above me, the superhero night light of the galaxy. And yet, there it was, the roaring silence of watching, ears focused, waiting for something to prove me wrong. A twig snapped, and I sat up instantly, eyes fixed on the giant tree trunks and what little I could make of the spaces between them. Tom either hadn't noticed or cared as he had begun cycling through the photos he had shot, calling me over to his part of the parking lot. I was glad to take my mind off it, whatever had shaken me, and as my ears listened intently for another, a confirmation of the rising anxiety in my chest, I began to feel silly. There's nothing out here but deer and foxes. My eyes glazed over at the sight of the countless stars, back to where the parking lot ended, as a siren whispered imperceptibly just for me. In its sobbing, the wind begged us to leave, and I could feel my unease rise. Want to move on to the next place? What, Nick? Yeah, just a sec. Want to try one more with one of the red lights? Okay, I said, and the dark and I contested, daring each other to look away. Next on Tom's list was Thunder Hole, a great rock inlet that spewed sea foam with an awful, thunderous crash, so fitting the name. Each powerful blow into the rock from the tireless Atlantic rang out before we could even see it, the car humming between the immense sound of the wind and the waves. Tom parked the car beside the road, with no parking lot to leave the minivan. He hopped out happily, jimmied open the sliding back door, and switched lenses, carefully clicking the lens into place and dropping the lens cap back into his black camera bag. 10:30 p.m. Wonder what we can get from the rocks. He tossed the camera tactfully over his shoulder, clicking his light back on, while I pulled my bag back onto my arm. I'd heard him but couldn't break my contest with it. Whatever it was about these woods that unnerved me. I nodded and clicked on my flashlight, scanning the peripheries of the forest, while the rocky shore pounded against the deep chasm of swirling tide. It was all at once beautiful and troubling, the sullenness of the spruce, the complete absence of humanity in the man-made light. Tom went down the slick granite steps and vaulted over the iron handrail to lay again on the rocks to look up. There I was, listening to the screech of the wind and the hammer of the cove, frozen in place, not in definable fear but a mounting curiosity. Were we being toyed with by some bored campers? No, I had thought that wouldn't make sense. The drive from the parking lot to Thunder Hole was 10 minutes on the park loop, the single accessible road, and no other cars were in sight. Tom again called me for help, the wind rattling the camera, and I decided to push the thought of it entirely out of my mind. I wasn't here for the woods tonight. I was here for the stars. Down the steps of Thunder Hole, the ocean was a punching drum, and I looked out to the horizon, trying to capture my shots. Leaning against the safety rail, Tom decided to ignore it. Just down the coastline, north of us, though entirely shrouded, was Cobble Beach, where earlier that day, we'd seen a couple get married along the rocks, and the day before, I was sure a bat or owl had swooped down and attacked my head when we watched the sunset. Though now I was embarrassingly confident it was my backpack hitting me in the head when I bent down to toy with a long strand of emerald seaweed that was lying against the muddy sand. It was hard to contrast the two, the root of my discomfort and the park under the sanctity of sunlight. So, I did my best to ignore it by taking photos of the ocean with my camera, using a long aperture and positioning the camera body between the holes in the graded post. Steadiness was essential. Any movement would ruin the intake, leaving it a grainy, indiscernible mess. Tom had years of experience with me, and while I was earnestly catching up, using his photos as free lessons in composition, graduating from aligning the focus in the center of the grid to the holy rule of thirds. The focus needed to get anything at all took my mind off the noise and the silence of the parking lot, and soon enough, I had forgotten about it entirely and chalked it up to lingering adolescent fears. Above us, rain clouds were fast approaching and beginning to obscure the only natural illumination save the waning crescent. Shit, clouds are coming in quick. Want to try the road up to Cadillac? The top will probably be closed off, but we can beat them with the elevation. Tom stood up, wiping the wetness of his back, the sea foam soaking the back of his body. Lowering my camera, I turned my flashlight towards him, standing above me on the jagged rocks, and nodded, "Let's do it." As Tom leaped back to the slicked platform, he hurriedly skipped back up the main road, the cove some 50 feet downhill from where the van parked, married by a steep staircase. I began following him when my foot squished against something. At my feet were dozens of squirming earwigs, attracted to the moist ground and sending me flooring up the stairs. If there was one part of nature that I never made peace with in 19 years, it was bugs. When I returned to the car, Tom had already restarted the engine, the sliding door closed again, and headlights showing the path ahead. The same winding road we'd been on for nearly an hour. The ticket in and out. Park Loop Road. We drove for another 15 or so minutes, the analog hue of the dash and warm headlights, the time passing slowly as we reached the road up the mountain we had visited the day before. When we reached the top of the hill, the curving path was blocked off by rusting yellow gates. The clouds had long caught up, and I stayed in the van while Tom tried to catch what we could. Defeated, he returned to the back of the truck and slid the door open, prepared to call it a night. The clips of his bag snapped as he unwound the lens from his camera when he paused. "What's up?" I craned my neck, watching him sift through his bag, his brow furrowing with each swipe. "My lens cap. Did I take it out of the bag at the parking lot?" No, I remember you dropping it in." "Why? Is it not there?"
No.
"Did I drop it here?" "I don't remember ever taking it out." As we both began to scan the road and grass, what was strange to us was not so much that it had been misplaced. Things happened, but that it was nowhere in sight. The car was picked clean. It was a rental and had no place to hide that we could have missed. Nowhere to hide. It couldn't have just walked off, not when we both remembered leaving it exactly where we always had. The small, important things were not something we just haphazardly left strewn about. They protected our lenses. It was in the name. But as we pored over every inch of the car and the surrounding area, it was simply not there. Gone. "Let's recheck the parking lot. Maybe it fell out." And so we did. We drove back around the park, speculating when or how it could have vanished until we looped around to the parking lot. The puddle in the concrete was still visible from the air conditioning, so little time had passed since we were first there that the cicadas were still silent. Without another word, we traced each step of our short time there, scrutinizing each pebble and rock that made up the lot. Not a cap in sight. At this point, Tom was becoming increasingly agitated and stupefied, pacing back and forth from the tree-like to the van while I stood still, darting the flashlight to and from where we'd been. Tom may not have noticed in his focus, but I couldn't help but remember the stillness of the woods and stopped. Whatever had hushed the cicadas had done so now with the wind. In our mumbling, only our echoes now remained. "Come on. It has to be at the hole. I must have dropped it." Again, we mounted up and tore down the road, My thoughts not on the lens cap, but on the feeling I got when I stood in that parking lot, looking out to the forest. Alone. Small. Not alone. Watched and toyed with. The words jumbled around as we approached Thunder Hole again. It was already 11 p.m., and the search continued in an excruciating silence, save the call and response of anything. And no, I stuck to the edge of the forest that sat against the road, thinking it must be near the car. The same puddle from the air conditioning still wet from our last round through here. Nick! It had come from behind me, and I turned back, expecting Tom to have the cap in his hands, laughing to put this whole debacle to rest. But as I turned to the staircase where Tom should have been, there was nothing. No one. My heart sank. I quickly flung my head and flashlight to either side of me, the strangling darkness filling in around me as I spun in circles, scanning for what had said my name, only tearing through the darkness to find more nothing, more absence, more of not Tom, dread filling into my lungs as I began to stumble around the road. The wind picking up again, screaming, howling out like a shrieking fox, the uncanny cry piercing my ears, the trees violently swaying from the sudden downburst. I ran for the stairs to where I knew Tom had been, where he must have called, tripping on the uneven steps, gripping the handrail. There, hands grabbed onto my arm, and I flung back, my balance gone as I crashed to the stairs hard on my back, pushing back whatever had caught me. Nick! Nick! Jesus Christ! Stop! I had been screaming. Tom pulled me up to my feet by my arm and flashed his light in my face. My eyes wild. Nick! What the hell was that? What words could even describe the frenzy my name had sent me into? When my heart dialed back from its beating in my throat, I tried to laugh. Sorry, I slipped. His eyes wide and unnerved, Tom shook his head and tried disregarding whatever he thought had come over me. Okay, well, I can't find the cap. Let's go home and try it in the morning. I could hardly contain my desire to leave. Okay? I stammered, nodding madly. Tom walked up the stairs without a second thought, and I followed close behind him, staring down at the earwigs on the steps, drowning in my paranoia. Tom settled into the driver's seat at the van, and I hastily shut the passenger door. As we settled in to drive again, now in a blistering void of conversation, he reached down to where he'd repeatedly placed the car keys, only to stop again. Do you have the cabin keys? My blood began to squirm. What? The cabin keys? Do you have them? And no, they're... I reached into the tray and felt nothing. They were gone. They were right there. Why would I have? Jesus Christ. Where the hell are they? Tom had grown uneasy as well, his hands frantically feeling in the dim interior for the exact keys we'd placed in the car so we wouldn't lose them. Your mother's going to kill me. You're sure you didn't take the keys by accident? No, I wouldn't. There would be no reason. Did you? No. So where the hell is it? He had grown angry. I don't know. Did we? I couldn't even guess. It has to be at the road up the mountain. Maybe it fell out when we were looking for the cap. No, please let us just leave and pay whatever fine we need to. I wanted to scream it, but I couldn't. The words, as hard as I was trying to force them out of my throat, were lodged in my beating chest. All I could do was stare. Please. The car lurched forward, and we vaulted down the road back towards the mountain. All the while, the forest squealed with the wind. My thoughts raced as he tore through the road, over and over and over again. First, the gate to the mountain, then the parking lot, then the cove again, and again, not daring to step out or listen to anything other than my heartbeat. I couldn't bear the thought of what I might hear, what thing might call if I opened the car door. So I sat there, useless, staring out into the darkness, waiting for the trees to burst to life and swallow us whole. The Park Loop Road became an agonizing spiral, each time as Tom frantically searched for the keys only to find nothing, trapped in a cycle of searching for a glimmering metal in the expanse of nothing. It was so dark, so empty. I wanted it to be over, to let whatever had happened, whatever we had disturbed, Leave us be. The forest, these woods, they were alive and they were angry. Each loop drove us to a desperate merry-go-round that forced me outside the car to join the search effort. My feet froze to the ground as I saw only the trees, and I knew they were staring back. The long arms of the cedars were bending now, contorting in crackling laughter that paralyzed me at each place. The parking lot, the cove, the gate, the parking lot, the road, the cove, back and forth and over until Tom too was afraid, truly afraid, trying to call my mom, but the service was too weak, too insignificant to the emptiness of the peninsula, the prison of it, the isolating life of its jaws devouring our minds as we circled aimlessly around, back to the beginning, back to the voice, back to Thunder Hole. The car lurched to a thrashing stop as Tom opened the car door, both of our flashlights on him as he paced along the road, muttering to himself before retaking the steps, the sweat on my head trickling into my eyes, the rain beginning rain down the frigid cold onto the earth. Alone again, I clung to the car's light, the park looking the same everywhere I turned. Nothing but a winding, snake-like road and trees. Oh God, the trees. They never ended. It was all trees and silence, and screaming. I wanted to cry. I am sure I had already, but maybe I was in my own loop. Panting, crying, watching the tree line, waiting for something out in the dark, being driven mad so we would be easier to take. The energy lilted from our aching, frantic bodies so that we would be easier to be had when the peninsula had enough of its fun. Was any of this real? Was it all a dream? I wanted to wake up, back in that cabin, back in my lumpy pull-out couch bed, and never see this fucking park again. Something stirred in the woods again, the foliage crunching beneath it. I was frozen, paralyzed. I want to go home. Please, I pleaded to the sky. I looked up, and the rain burned my eyes, but the light was gone. The universe had closed its window. We were alone. I closed my eyes and shook, clutching my camera tightly. It would do nothing. Sticks snapped, and I crawled out of my skin. It was getting closer, louder, but I couldn't see. Tom had the lights. I did the only thing I could think of. I pulled the camera close to my chest, switched the dial on, and held tight to the trigger. A violent flash ripped across the woods like lightning, holding it down to be an endless stream of flickering white to blind it, force it back and live. Tom! Tom! I cried out, trying to break through the storm's wail, desperately trying to win back a chance to escape. From behind me, hard footsteps ran back up the stairs of the cove, matched with dragging, awful rustles of leaves from ahead of me. Nick! What? Oh my God! Both footsteps stopped. For a moment, I stood still, shivering from the cold terror. Nick! What? I called out, unmoved, teeth clamoring between the water spilling into my mouth. Tom breathed heavily behind me and rested his arm on my shoulder. Look! Slowly, I turned and opened my eyes. He motioned to the stairs, and with each slow, careful step, he led me to the base of the staircase. There, neatly sprawled out with its leather band, the keys rested against the base of the stairs in the center rock of the step. There was no reason to it. It just was. Tom looked at me and said nothing. How many times did we walk up these stairs? I only stared. There was no explanation. It wasn't there, and it was. Adorned in earwigs. Tom picked up the keys and we broke to life, sprinting to the van, slamming it to life and veering down the road. My hands shook in my lap as Tom screamed. There's no way. There's no way. It wasn't there. Nick, it wasn't there. I know. The car slowed to the exit of the park loop, the entrance sign where it had welcomed us. We were freezing, panting, and utterly distraught. When we were looking for the cap, at the cove, before I started screaming, Did you call my name? Tom stared ahead at the road for a moment before turning to face me, pale and gaunt.
No.
It was nearly 5 in the morning when we returned to the campsite. We'd been in those woods for 8 hours, running in circles. Back on the back road, I began filing through the photos from the night, the serene pictures of the ocean, the stars as best I could capture them. Then the trees. The photos I'd taken, nothing could be made out. There were hundreds of them. Had I taken that many? It had felt like a moment. But in the hundreds of photos, the rain had started, stopped, and begun again. I didn't remember the rain stopping. In each picture, there was nothing but the forest. And we never remembered passing the old barn on the way back. In the morning, we packed up and left, and we lied. Said we'd done all we could out here. Went to see family in Vermont. I never showed anyone the photos. I can't forget it. Every night, I see the dark and what's out there in the dark. I need to know. I need to know what happened. I need to know what I saw. I need to know what saw me. But every time I look at that photo, I see myself looking back. There is no God in that park, but there is something else. I need to know. I have to be incredibly careful with what I say here, not just because of the NDA I signed with one of the biggest names in gaming, but because what I'm about to share is one of the darkest secrets a billion-dollar company could possibly bury. And I fear the consequences might be worse than a pack of hungry lawyers clawing down my door. Honestly, I never planned to speak on any of this. In my mind, it was always meant to stay buried. One of the skeletons we take to the grave, you know? Maybe it had come out to a longtime partner or some random at a bar. But for the most part, I fully expected to keep all of this to myself. Things have changed. Drastically. A few months back, I was lurking on a few boards and came across a rumor that this particular gaming studio was developing a new project. By rule, I typically avoided anything related to this gaming studio, so it had been a while since I had seen any associated news. I suppose that when I did see the community buzzing, it sparked a mild curiosity. This goes without saying, but most online rumors are entirely false, regardless of the conversation around them. However, anyone with a nerdy niche interest knows that if you're in the right circles, there's always someone who seems to know just a little bit more than everyone else. And confirmation from one of these types of people led me on a wild goose chase for more information. While I didn't find much beyond hints at what might be in development, I came across a comment that halted my research. The comment read, "I'm surprised the gaming company is still around. Does anyone else recall the disturbing stunt they pulled at their offices years ago? They never addressed it and continued on like nothing happened after seriously traumatizing people. Seriously, stop buying their games." It was odd at the moment. I could feel my heartbeat rapidly increasing in my chest. I kept rereading the comment over and over because there was no way he was referring to what I thought he was referring to. 5, 10, 15 minutes later, I'm still looking at the comment, trying to deny what I knew had to be true. But why was I reacting like that? I had seen the company's name and watched playthroughs of their game. Hell, I was doing research on them myself. Why was I reacting like this? Only now, on reflection, do I realize it's not about them. It's not even about me. Not really. It's in the understanding that the experience was a shared one. Not just my trauma, but the widespread silent trauma of everyone who had been there. We saw something collectively, and the fact that it wasn't just me or one or two other people made it so much more real. And even more so, we were all so scared that every single person had been forced into silence. I quickly typed out a reply for the commenter to message me. Not good enough. After deleting the comment, I messaged them directly, hoping and praying for a response. Almost immediately after I did, they replied with a simple F, off, and blocked me. Great. I spent the next few weeks looking to see if anyone else had said anything similar. My life was comprised of going to work, ordering takeout, and scouring the internet for someone else who had come forward. Nothing. And in the midst of all of this, I got a call, one that sent me spiraling. It reignited images of that day so vivid I often feel as though they're burned into my psyche. The following nightmares have woken me up in cold sweats on multiple occasions. So here I am, telling a story roughly a decade old. I apologize if anyone was looking for a grand adventure or a philosophical lesson. This isn't that. Just a story of a terrified man who understands that telling you this may be the only way I can cope. That's all I'm asking for at this point. I don't need a solution or even for those responsible to face justice. I just want to be able to sleep peacefully again. So, there I was again, lurking on forums. This one, in particular, was dedicated to one of the most anticipated titles of the time from the aforementioned gaming studio. Exciting life, I know. I rarely talked on forums, but whenever I did, I'd usually get replies from the same few accounts. Most of it was innocuous, and nothing I've committed to memory. I suppose that day was unique. At that point, we were still far enough away from release that there wasn't a whole lot of information out yet. So I did what any delusional person would do. I asked the board if anyone knew someone with inside info. Gameplay, mechanics, plans for the story. I didn't care. I just wanted something to enhance the excitement I was already feeling in the fear that my curiosity would grow painfully unbearable. Hours passed, and disappointingly, my question was lost in the sea of random conversation. It's not the first time, but this one stung a bit extra. I slept, thought nothing of it, and woke up to a familiar notification the next day. It was one of the accounts that had often replied to me. When I checked the forum, he had responded to my post with a simple yes and a link. Curious but excited, I cautiously clicked on it to see what they had sent me. I was greeted by this bland-looking flyer. My eyes widened as I read the headline, "Meet and Greet with the Dev Team," along with the company logo and the title of the upcoming game. I nearly gasped when I finished reading the words. Here was my chance. I could meet the team behind the game and get some inside information on their plans. Hell, maybe I could even bring some of the most asked questions from the forum back and really make an impression on people. Anything to get those meaningless internet points. And wouldn't you know it? They were setting up shop pretty close and tickets were relatively cheap. Back then, I assumed that dev teams only met fans at huge cons or launch parties if they did at all. Never before a game was even released. But I wasn't complaining. In the end, I figured it was perhaps something to stir up some hype. It's not unusual for PR teams to devise innovative ways to connect with the public. And hey, maybe the team leaked a rumor or two to one of the participants who then spread it around, and now there's a newfound interest in your game. It's wrong as hell now, but that's how I rationalized it in my mind. The day of the meet and greet arrives, and I'm headed over. My expectation is to pull into a GameStop or some other cleared-out lot with tons of fanfare. Maybe there would be signing booths, different stations, mascots, you know? The whole thing. Instead, I pull into a relatively mundane set of office buildings. At first, I wasn't sure if I was very early or being pranked because there was no way an official event wouldn't have hundreds of people there, especially given that I live near a very populous city. Looking out my window, I finally spot a decent-sized line of people coming out of one of the buildings and several unremarkable signs lazily pointing toward where the meet and greet is taking place. Side note, if you're looking to crush the spirit of anyone attending your event, just don't try. Seriously, no effort is almost always worse than a bad effort. At least the latter shows you care. Anyway, remarkably less enthused, I made my way over to the line and waited. The most interesting part was the small talk with the organizers and some of the other waiting people. Not only that, but the line moved so slowly. If I hadn't been really committed to meeting the devs, I likely would have just walked away. I mostly stayed on my phone during my wait, but the few times I glanced up, something caught my eye. Every person who left seemed out of place. I don't know how to describe my feelings at the time. I think at first I thought they were all depressed. At first I assumed it was just general disappointment. But the more I observed, the more they seemed genuinely sad. A good portion of those who left were crying. Total strangers would exchange silent hugs. There was just this heaviness that I couldn't perceive. Little did I know that was a sneak peek at what was to come. My attention was immediately caught as I shifted my focus to the front door. At first, I thought I was being deluded. I had to be. But the more I watched, the more I noticed that not everyone who went inside came back out. You wouldn't see it at a glance. The frequency was irregular, masterfully so. Just a few people vanishing here and there, never enough to trigger alarm. Maybe they stayed for an extra autograph? Maybe there was a back door? Rational questions. What's harder to rationalize is why they never returned to the only available parking lot. How many confused office workers glanced at them and quietly wondered? How many people were tasked with removing them and brushed off the creeping question? Where did the owners go? The thought of the empty cars sitting there, waiting for someone who would never return, it bugs me. I still get the ick when I see a car that's been sitting empty in one spot for too long. After what felt like forever, I finally made it to the front of the line. A guy in oversized sunglasses gave me a lazy nod toward the office entrance. The moment I stepped inside, I got hit with a blast of cold air. One of their hit game soundtracks was playing through some cheap, blown-out speakers, filling the space with tinny noise. Behind a desk sat a balding clerk, half buried in a sea of paperwork with a few suspicious Kens lying about. Off to the side stood a single orange door. Taped to the frame was a scrap of paper with the poorly written words, Dev Team. I glanced around, expecting more before mentally chastising myself, given how the rest of the event had gone. Couldn't exactly expect much more than what I was seeing. Aside from a dusty life-size cutout of one of their big-name characters, the room was depressingly bare. No merch, no excited fans, no energy, just recycled air, bad music, and the sense that maybe this wasn't worth the $40. We exchanged a few awkward hellos, and he slid a thick stack of paperwork my way. By then, I had already begun to feel that I no longer wanted to do this. But I'd come all this way, spent the gas, took the day off. At that point, it made more sense to just get it over with. I signed the forms and returned them. He took them, looked down, and hesitated. Then he let out a deep sigh and rubbed his temples. "Long day, man?" I asked him, trying to keep it light. He stared at me longer than necessary, then let out a short, tired laugh. "Yeah, long day," he said before rattling off a canned spiel about NDAs and basic rules. Then he pointed toward the orange door, plastered a half-hearted smile on his face, and said, "Good luck." Ready to get my answers and promptly leave, I walked toward the door and give the man behind the desk, who had now moved to silently playing on his phone, one final half-smile. Touching the doorknob was like plunging my hand into dry ice. An instant, burning cold made me yank back with a gasp while instinctively shooting a look at the guy behind the desk. My shocked and angry expression spoke for me. He glanced up, gave me a lazy shrug, and went right back to scrolling on his phone. I wrapped my sleeve around my hand and tried again, gripping the cold metal through the fabric. This time, the door creaked open. Inside, shadows swallowed everything. The only light came from the sickly blue glow of scattered computer monitors. As I stepped in, the door clicked shut behind me. The awful music from the lobby vanished, smothered by thick silence broken only by a low electrical hum and a slight burning smell. Hello," I called out, my words eaten by the dark. I like to consider myself a rational person. I knew from the jump that this whole experience was off, and whatever this was, it set my danger signals to 100. I spun back toward the door and reached for the knob, only to recoil again. It was colder now, not just cold, biting. My fingers stung on contact like I touched dry steel in a snowstorm. I forced myself to try again. It didn't budge. I swore under my breath and pounded on the door. Hey! Hey! Nothing. I hit it again, harder this time. Desperate now, but no answer came. I tried again. Nothing. Like a caged animal, I pulled and twisted, hoping I could tear down the only thing keeping me from safety. But with each failed attempt, the cold reality sank in that I was alone. The hum and the dark were my only company. I let out a frustrated scream into the nothing before turning to face the dark room again. My eyes strained, hunting for some other way out. anything that wasn't a dead end. I crept toward the soft glow of one of the computer screens, moving slowly when my shin knocked into something solid. I froze. Reaching out, my fingers brushed against the back of something hard. Cautiously, I felt around the object until my mind pieced together what it was from the little light in the room. It was a chair. Figuring maybe I could use it to reach a vent or something, I swirled the object toward me, and before I even had time to process why, I was already falling back hard onto the floor. Someone was sitting in it, slumped, still, almost posed. The dim monitor light cast a sickly blue glow over his face, but it wasn't the screen that drew my eye. It was his mouth. It hung unnaturally wide, distended, broken-looking, and from within, a striped red and blue light spun like a siren buried in his throat. The flickering cast shadows across his gaunt face, dancing over skin pulled tight to the bone. Whatever fat or muscle he'd once had was long gone. He looked consumed, like he'd been starved from the inside out. His hands gripped the arms of the chair so tightly they seemed fused to it. Flesh sunken, knuckles bone white, fingernails blackened. His clothes hung off him in tatters, dusted in long strands of white hair that looked like they'd once belonged to a full head of shoulder-length hair. But it was his eyes, or the absence of them, that made my breath catch. His eye sockets gaped impossibly wide, empty but surgically clean. Not a drop of blood, not a shred of tissue. Just polished hollows where his eyes should have been. And yet, somehow they weren't empty, because inside each socket, suspended in the void, spun another light, identical to the one in his mouth. Red and blue, rotating, silent, hypnotic. I found myself staring, trapped in those pits, caught in the endless cycle of color and motion. I don't know how long I was lost there, only that I snapped out of it with a sharp slap to my own face. Then I kicked the corpse away from me hard. My breathing turned erratic. My thoughts were a storm of confusion and panic. I had to find a way out. Now, I shot to my feet, fumbling for my phone, and flicked on the flashlight, desperately looking for another way out, but nearly dropped it when something on the man's monitor caught my attention. Lines of code were appearing on the screen, then vanishing, then reappearing, as if someone were typing and deleting in real time. I moved to the next workstation. Another body, same position, same spinning lights. Code was being written there as well. I moved to the next, and the next. Every screen, every corpse, every one of them still writing. I'm no game developer, but I couldn't stop myself from looking closer. Even with my limited understanding, it was clear this was game code. Someone had to see this. I hit record and made a second round, capturing all of the bodies in their workstations, hoping that as soon as I got out, I'd take it to everyone I could think of. The police, friends, and family. Hell, I would drive to the state capitol and show it to the governor if I had to. Whatever was happening here couldn't be kept a secret. And then the silence broke. It was subtle, barely there. In any other setting, I might have missed it entirely. The faintest sound of an inhale. I turned toward the sound, my heart hammering against my ribs. One of them, the one nearest to me, its jaw twitched, a tiny, grotesque motion, like it was struggling to open wider, to pull in more air. I stepped closer. The mouth opened further, joints clicking. The breath came again, deeper this time. They were breathing. I turned on my phone's flashlight, desperately looking around the room for a way out. And the lights, God, the lights in their eyes started spinning faster, the speed increasing in sync with the breaths. It was like they were waking up. I turned my phone's flashlight back on and swept it across the room. Panic now in full bloom. There had to be another way out, there had to be. But the walls were bare. No windows, no vents. I was alone with the glowing screens and breathing corpses. I turned and bolted back to the door. I grabbed the knob again, but this time, the cold was even deeper. It burned my skin, but I didn't let go. Couldn't. All the while, I'm banging and screaming at the top of my lungs. Please, for the love of God, help me.
Bang, bang, bang.
The breaths were growing deeper, heavier. I knew I was running out of time. I slammed my fists against the door harder, faster. From behind me, I heard it, the soft creak of old chairs turning in unison.
Bang, bang.
Help! I screamed, desperate. Raw. A wet cough echoed from the room. One of the corpses was waking up. They were coming. God damn it! I yelled. And then, daylight. I flew out the tiny crack, turning for a final glance just in time to see one of the corpses illuminated by the light, its neck cracking as it fully rotated toward me. Its jaw popped as it attempted to communicate. And then, in a loud whisper that didn't match the movement of its mouth, it spoke. Standing above me was the man from the front desk, arms crossed, face twisted with barely concealed annoyance, like I'd spilled coffee on his favorite keyboard. "All right, that's enough," he said flatly. "You need to leave." I scrambled upright, gasping, trying to piece together a coherent sentence. Anything to make him understand. I babbled about the bodies, the lights, the breathing, the code. He held up a finger to his lips and then pointed at the door, all while giving me a look that clearly stated, "You're crazy." I stared back, confused. How could he not get it? I wasn't crazy. I had seen what I saw. The man himself was mere feet from the door. And if others were experiencing the same thing within minutes of each other, I'd imagine all of them would be as disturbed as I am. So, what the hell? At first, I didn't want to leave. I couldn't leave. There were people in there who clearly needed help. And I'd already seen others go in and never come out. I begged the man to listen. That's when two large guys materialized out of nowhere and physically removed me from the building. No discussion. Later, I got a text. No pleasantries. Just a reminder that everything I saw and heard that day was protected under the NDA I signed. And a warning that this company had no qualms about launching life-ruining lawsuits to protect its secrets. First, I didn't care. What I had recorded clearly crossed a line. This wasn't just a breach of contract, but a serious criminal offense. Then I tried to check the footage. Corrupted. Every file. Of course. The only thing left was to call the police. Elite said there were sick people inside, possibly in danger. But I didn't stick around. I couldn't bring myself to be there when they showed up. To this day, as far as I know, there's never been a news story. No investigation. No PR nightmare for the company. Only silence. I wish I could take anything from any of this. As far as I know, I don't have clinical depression. But I felt like I was right there for a couple of months. The game eventually came out to great reviews, and of course I couldn't bring myself to play it. Or any of their other games, for that matter. It's weird. You'd think any mention of that studio or their IPs would send me into a full-blown panic. But it's not like that. Not at all. I do have this lingering dread that follows. But it's almost like my abject fear is stuck in that place. Or rather, with that place. I mean, hell, I don't even know if whatever I experienced has anything to do with the studio in question. To that point, I conducted research on who was involved with the actual game, and none of the names of the development team that I allegedly met were listed. But still, they were coding something, right? I mean, I saw them building a game. I think of all this. The thing I think back on most was when the last corpse turned to me. He said something that was undeniably the most true thing I know about this situation. He said, "I'm in hell. Whoever you are or were, I'm sorry. Last thing." And I almost forgot this one. For a while, I was getting these weird calls. At first, I thought they were just promotional robocalls telling me to buy their games because I had been placed on a list somewhere. One day, I grew tired of the spam and said something less than pleasant on the phone. Immediately, the guy on the other end pauses and tells me, "Remember to keep your fucking mouth shut." He proceeded to list off my home address and where I worked at the time. Then he hung up, and for years he never called back. It wasn't until after I tried communicating with that random commenter that I finally received another call. The call that set me on the path here today. He didn't speak for long. He didn't need to. I'll remember his words forever. He said, "You almost broke your silence. It's too bad. We know you have great eyes for gaming. Next time, we'll use them." To this day, I don't know what to do with that. Before anyone asks, no, I'm not saying the location of the offices or releasing any information about anything. I just can't. Even if I could, I don't believe anyone should be digging into this. Honestly, I wish I could end this off with something, I don't know, important, meaningful. However, I don't have anything to offer. Like I said earlier, I'm just a scared guy who needed to vent. However, I appreciate anyone who took the time to read this. At the very least, I can offer you this parting piece of advice. Be really careful which doors you step through. You never know what you'll find on the other side. I've always loved horror stories. When you're a kid, most of the world is so unknowable it feels mysterious. Like anything at all could be possible, you just haven't seen it yet. When you grow up, of course, the magic wears off and the boring reality of closets without monsters and dark rooms with nothing to hide sets in. As 10-year-old obsessed with scary books and campfire stories, I believed in everything and wanted nothing more than to prove their reality. I spent hours walking the trails near my house on dark, foggy days and stayed up long after my parents were asleep in hopes of seeing a flickering light or a couch moving by itself. I was terrified and fascinated all at once, and I was sure there was something out there that only I could discover. My first taste of the supernatural was from a story my best friend Jack told me when we were around 7 or 8. His family had moved house only recently, and one of the reasons, he told me, was because their old one was haunted. One night, he was lying in bed trying to sleep when he heard voices coming from down the hallway. He thought nothing of it at first. It was probably his parents, so he turned over and tried to fall asleep. But the longer it went on, the more he listened to them. There was only one voice, female, but it didn't sound like his mother or sister. So he got out of bed, put on his dressing gown, and walked to the door. Pressing his ear against it, he could hear the voice louder, but he couldn't tell what it was saying. He opened the door as slowly as he could. Yellow light from the hallway spilled through the widening gap. He stepped out and walked down the hallway and around the corner, but there was no one around. Then he heard the whispers coming from downstairs, but by the time he got to the bottom, they were gone. He stood still on the last step for a few moments, looking out into the dark living room. He couldn't see anyone, and he didn't want to look any further. It doesn't sound very convincing looking back, but it creeped the hell out of me at that age, especially when he told me his parents had heard the voice before. And when they told him the last owner, an old lady, had died in the house, that was all the both of us needed to believe without question. The house was definitely haunted, and that was definitely why they moved out. The other big ghost story at that age was told to us by another friend, a tall red-headed kid called Alex. Alex's story came from his older brother, a 16-year-old who, to us, gave the tale ultimate authority. It was a ritual, he said. You go into a bathroom, run both the taps in the sink, turn out all the lights, and look at yourself in the mirror. Then you close your eyes and say, "Bloody Mary," 3 times. When you open your eyes, you see a woman's face in the mirror covered in blood, and then she kills you. This one was pretty silly, especially as I now know it's an urban legend that goes back decades in England. But I'll never forget how scared I felt standing alone in the schoolyard while Jack and a few of the other boys went into the bathroom to try it out. I was so sure I'd never see Jack again. When I was 11, I started my first year of secondary school. That was where I first heard about the monster in the woods. At that age, I was allowed to play browser games on my dad's laptop at the weekends, and when no one was looking, I would scour the web for ghost stories and urban legends. I became hooked and read through probably hundreds of short tales on forums and local myths on forgotten websites. I memorized my favorites and would sit around with my friends at school at lunchtime, telling them as best I could. I wasn't much of a storyteller, but I had a great time trying to scare everyone. All boys at that age seemed to enjoy a scary story, but only 2 loved them as much as me, Jack, and my other best friend at the time, Roger. Roger was tall and confident and was the social butterfly of our trio. While Jack and I were quiet, he was loud and funny and always making new friends. We got on like a house on fire. It was Roger who first told us about the monster. Walking home from school one sunny afternoon, talking and joking, he said, "Do you guys know the gnawbone?" "What's the gnawbone?" I asked, immediately serious. "It's a monster in the forest down Landing Lane," he said. "You just made that up," said Jack. "Nah, Simon told me." "Simon's a liar, Roger," said Jack. "He's just joking with you." "No way," said Roger, shaking his head. He heard about some kids from Drury Road School that went down there a few weeks ago and got chased out by the gnawbone. "We're not stupid," said Jack. "What did it look like?" I asked. "It was like white all over and had these huge teeth," Roger said, indicating with his hands. "And it crawled like a dog and ran after them." "I don't believe it," said Jack. "Why wouldn't the police do something about it?" "Don't be stupid, Jack. The police wouldn't believe them anyway." I said, "We've got to go check it out, guys." "Yes, we'll hunt this thing down and kill it," said Roger. "Okay then, but I still think it's a joke," said Jack. "We better be prepared though," I said. "The gnawbone sounds pretty dangerous." "We'll bring some weapons," said Roger. "It'll be no match for us. I'll get my dad's flashlight. Meet by the Landing Lane sign tonight then," I said. We ran back home grinning. We were finally going to catch a real-life monster. I could hardly sit still during dinner, and the clock seemed to be going much slower than usual. At last the sun began to set, and I told my parents I was going out to Jack's house for a sleepover. It was the weekend tomorrow, so I knew they wouldn't mind. I stepped out the door with my father's big silver flashlight in one hand and a toy sword tucked inside my belt. It was made of hard, thick wood with a red painted handle, and I thought it would do some serious damage if we got into any danger. I set out for Landing Lane ready for adventure. When I reached the sign, Jack and Roger were already waiting for me. Jack was holding a ring spanner and Roger was holding a small plastic gun that fired rubber darts. "The gnawbone's gonna be fucked," said Roger, seeing my sword. "If we can even find it," said Jack. "I was going to bring the cap gun I modified," said Roger. "You know, the one that shoots real bullets? But I left it at my cousin's house." "This stuff'll be good enough," I said. "Come on, let's go." We started down the path as the sun sunk down over the horizon. Landing Lane went up from a cul-de-sac off the main road and wound down through a series of fields and little country houses. But a short way up it, there was a narrow dirt trail that ran off downhill and along a river that went for miles. We turned down and followed the trail, where it quickly became dense in trees and overgrown grass. "Where did they see the gnawbone?" I asked Roger. "I think it was past the weir," he said, "where the woods are." We crossed the footbridge and came to the fork in the trail. If you turn right, you follow the river across miles of open country. If you turn left, you go past the weir and into the woods. We turned left. "Cliff, turn the flashlight on," Jack said to me. It was getting dark now, and it was hard to see where we were going. I found the rubber button with my thumb, but when I clicked it, nothing happened. "Isn't it working?" said Roger. "Hang on," I said, hitting the top a few times. It came to life and lit up the weir in front of us. I clicked it to the highest setting. "Wow, that's great," said Roger. "We can see anything with this." We trudged along in unison, me sweeping the flashlight and Roger pointing his dart gun ahead with both hands. We followed the trail across the creek and up a dirt hill where the trees leaned together, blocking out almost all of the moonlight. We had been in the woods several minutes when Roger stopped us. "Look over there. I think I see something," he said, pointing through the brush and past the fence. "We're not supposed to leave the trail, Roger," I said. "This is important. We're the only ones with a chance to catch it," he said. I decided he was right and Jack agreed. So we stepped off the trail and over the rotting fence. We continued walking at a slower pace. The brush was thick and we had to constantly push through branches and leaves to make progress. We couldn't see much in front of us anymore as the flashlight only lit up as far as the next tree hanging down in our way. "What did you see up here, Roger?" asked Jack. "I don't know, it just looked interesting," he replied. "Keep going, we'll find something soon." We pressed forward until we came to a clearing with a line of pine trees on one side and the dirt covered in dead autumn leaves. "Hey, check this out," said Jack. He was crouched in the dirt holding a burgundy wool scarf. Roger and I walked over to him. "Monsters don't wear scarves, dummy," said Roger. "No, but someone was out here. How did they find it when we went off the trail?" said Jack. "Let's keep looking," I said, excitement growing. I walked past the bush we came through and pointed the flashlight out down the row of pine trees. The clearing stretched out farther than I could see. "Hey, I think this is a path, guys," I said. "Awesome. Maybe this is the Gnawbone's den," said Roger. We huddled together and walked along the hidden road. I took the sword out of my belt and brandished it in front of me. Roger pointed the dart gun ahead and Jack readied the spanner. We crept along looking for signs of a den. Snap! We spun around in unison, pointing our light and weapons in the direction of the sound. It sounded like a twig snapping, but we saw no culprit. "You guys heard that too, right?" said Jack. "Let's go quicker, guys," said Roger. We walked faster, throwing glances over our shoulders, until something big came into the view of the flashlight. It was a house. A big old brick house with 2 stories and a big chimney on the roof. The bricks were cracked behind layers of moss. The roof was missing tiles and half the windows were smashed in. "Whoa, what's that?" I whispered. "This must be where the Gnawbone lives," replied Roger. We walked towards the house and saw no one around. The door was open and there was a faded sign above it. "St. Margaret's Home for the Chronically Insane." "Wow, it's an old asylum," said Jack. "What's an asylum?" asked Roger. "It's where you go if you're crazy," said Jack. "Don't you live in one?" We laughed and shone the flashlight through some of the ground floor windows. We couldn't make out any people or any furniture inside. "Should we go in?" said Roger, suddenly seeming a little less confident than usual. "Okay," I said. Battling the Gnawbone didn't seem so easy now we were here. We crept up the steps and peered through the door. It looked empty. "You go first," said Roger. "No way, you've got a gun," I replied. Roger stepped up to the doorframe and put his back against the wall, gun in both hands. He then spun around and strode inside with it pointed in front of him, just like we'd seen cops do in movies. "This room's clear," he whispered. We followed him inside. The room looked like it used to be a reception area with a long wooden desk built into the corner and a stairwell leading up to the next floor. "Let's go upstairs," I said. "It's probably hidden up there." Roger led the way up the stairwell and we stepped into a large ward lined with rusty metal hospital beds. "This is so creepy, guys," said Roger. I walked along the room, swinging the flashlight across everything. Then I stopped dead, light pointing at the wall. "Guys," I said, "look at this." On the wall was some graffiti written in green spray paint. It said, "I walk the trees night by night. I know each one by name and sight. I find the children all alone, and rip and tear and gnaw the bones." "What the fuck?" said Roger. "That's so creepy," said Jack. "I wonder who wrote it?" "I think we should get out of here," I said. "Yeah, he's probably not here anyways," said Roger. "Gnawbone got off lucky tonight." Jack and I managed to chuckle and we headed downstairs. We stepped out the door and walked down the way we came. The atmosphere was lighter now we were heading home, and we laughed and joked as we strode through the leaves. Roger just got to the end of a funny story about his cousin when we heard it. Footsteps. We must have been making quite a lot of noise as we came down, so we didn't notice it at first, but in the silence it was obvious. We all froze in our tracks and the footsteps stopped a second later. We stood there a moment, too scared to turn around. "Did you guys hear that?" I whispered as quietly as I could. I saw them nod. I motioned for them to keep walking again, hoping desperately that we were mistaken. But we weren't. I heard the footsteps start again with us, trying to keep in rhythm with ours but not quite succeeding. "Run!" I yelled, and we took off sprinting across the leaves. "Look for the scarf," yelled Jack. That's where we turned off. As we ran, I was sure I heard the footsteps start to run as well. Without turning, I threw my sword behind me as hard as I could, but I didn't hear it hit anything, just the sound as it dropped to the dirt. I saw the scarf up ahead and the hole in the bushes where we came out from. We dived in and began the fight through the greenery. It seemed even more dense and hard to push through now, and I was running low on energy. It was a cold night in autumn, and I wished I had worn my coat. Then I tripped on a tree root and hit the ground. The flashlight fell from my hand and went out. My friends pulled me up and grabbed it, but it wouldn't turn on again, even when I hit it. We had no choice but to push on without light and find our way home. We finally made it back to the trail, covered in scratches and nettle stings. We stopped for a second to catch our breath, but I heard rustling back where we came from and we sprinted down the trail, hoping we had picked the right direction. I knew we did when I saw the river emerge from the trees in the moonlight. We were almost safe. When we were far enough away from the woods, we went the rest of the way at a quick walk. None of us had heard footsteps in a little while, but we didn't feel much better. After what seemed like an eternity, we were off the trail and back on the paved footpath of Landing Lane. We walked down to the cul-de-sac and under the street lamps, the first light we'd seen for a while. We walked to the main road and set off up the hill to Roger's house for night. We knew his parents wouldn't mind us being out so late as long as we were quiet. As we lay in our blankets piled on Roger's floor, we discussed what had happened on our adventure. It was definitely the gnawbone following us, we decided, and we'd tell everyone at school on Monday. When Monday came around, most of them didn't believe us, of course. We were too well known as horror fans to make any kind of convincing case for our encounter out in the woods, even when Roger showed his scratches to anyone who would look. But it didn't matter to us. We knew what had happened, and were certain we'd had a close encounter with the paranormal. As excited as we were, though, we never went down Landing Lane after dark again. Things went on as normal after that. I was still reading horror stories and still obsessed with proving them to be real. I wrote off the gnawbone as a confirmed case and moved on to others, though I never got anywhere as close to any of them. As we got older, Roger and his family moved away. We tried to stay in touch, but you know how it goes when you're little. He was a 3-hour car ride away, and to us, he might as well have been on the moon. Jack and I never saw him again after we turned 12. Eventually, I left school, got a job, and moved out of town. I still kept in touch with Jack, but I got busy and didn't see him as often as I wanted to. Until one day, at the ripe old age of 24, I got a call from him. The first time I saw the 13th floor was just a few days ago, and I hope I will never see it again. It was a normal Monday, and I was exhausted after a long day of work. I work as a nurse at Westview Hospital, and my shifts were always draining, especially that day since I had to work a double. Finally, my shift ended and I hurried out the door. I appreciated not having to worry about parking in a city that was normally so busy. Living so close to work had its advantages. Westview was often still bustling at that hour, but tonight it felt eerily abandoned, as though the world had retreated into the shadows. My apartment building loomed ahead and I quickened my pace, anxious to get inside. I stepped into the lobby of Central Heights, passing by Ray the doorman and offering a polite nod to his wave. Normally, I would have stopped to chat, but I was too tired and was just looking forward to a bath, a stiff drink, and maybe a TV show before I collapsed into sleep. As I made my way toward the elevator, I was already scrolling through my phone for something to watch while waiting for the long ride to the 16th floor. I pressed the button and suddenly felt a strange sensation. The hair on my arms stood on end and I felt like I was being watched. I glanced over my shoulder but saw nothing. No one was in the lobby. Ray was still at his station, absorbed in a novel. It must have been nothing, I tried to reassure myself. Yet, the feeling persisted, like unseen fingers trailing along my spine. When the elevator finally arrived, I stepped in without hesitation. I quickly pressed 16 and waited. Out of the corner of my eye, I noticed something odd, a powdery white dust near the elevator console. I checked myself to make sure I hadn't gotten any on me, but there was no trace of it on my clothes or skin. Then I looked closer and saw a chalk-like smudge right on the console between the numbers 12 and 14. A disturbing chill ran through me as my hand hovered near the strange mark. I paused, processing the bizarre sight before the bell chimed and the doors opened to my floor. Shrugging off the unease, I stepped off. I walked down the hall to my apartment and sighed with relief that my day was over. As I approached my door, eager to collapse onto my couch, I rummaged through my bag. A knot formed in my stomach as I realized my keys were still at the hospital, left on the break room counter. I groaned and trudged back to the elevator, resigned to having to retrieve them. I pressed the down button, and after a brief wait, the door opened, not far from where I stood. To my surprise, I wasn't alone in the elevator. There, occupying the small space, was an impossibly large figure draped in a long white coat. Their face was hidden by a hood, and their tall, rail-thin form exuded an unsettling presence. I took an instinctive step back, disturbed by the sight, but I tried to steady myself and not stare. I considered waiting for the next elevator, yet the door wouldn't close. The figure remained motionless, its hood concealing any trace of expression as it stared impassively. Realizing I had no way to get back to my apartment without my keys, I reluctantly stepped into the elevator with the tall figure and pressed the button for the lobby. That's when something made me do a double take. Even with the giant hooded figure standing silently beside me, I noticed an extra button on the panel, a softly glowing 13. It wasn't there earlier when I'd gone up to my own floor. I noticed the 13 button bore a large imprint of white chalky powder, and I saw that the looming figure's feet were also surrounded by that same odd substance. The elevator lurched into motion as I felt a cold dread wash over me. The buttons on the panel flickered in a strange, otherworldly rhythm as the elevator began its descent. The hooded figure beside me remained completely still, filling the confined space with an oppressive silence. I felt its unseen gaze upon me, its face forever obscured by the hood. My breath caught when the elevator slowed and the digital display above the doors flickered from 14 to a distorted blur, then to a number that sent a chill coursing through my veins, 13. When the doors slid open with a hollow clang, a dimly lit hallway unfolded before me, a place that didn't belong in my building. Thick, damp air spilled out, carrying the scent of old dust mixed with a trace of something metallic. My heart pounded as the figure stepped forward with an unnervingly fluid grace. Pausing in the doorway, it slowly turned its hooded head in my direction, as though silently inviting me to follow. I stood rooted to the spot, unable to move. My legs refused to budge as my mind screamed for me to run, to shout, to do anything other than step further into that dark, unnatural space. Suddenly, I felt lightheaded and tried to steady myself against the elevator wall. But before I knew it, I crumbled to the floor, unconscious. When I came to, I sat up abruptly and nearly screamed, only to realize that I was still in the elevator. It had descended back to the lobby, and the strange hooded figure was nowhere to be seen. I had no idea how I had passed out. Perhaps I was more exhausted than I'd thought, yet it had felt so real, too real. I'd never experienced such a vivid nightmare before. As I stepped out, I glanced back at the elevator panel one last time and noticed a faint smudge of white powder near it. Shaken, I left and headed back to work to retrieve my keys. When I got back to my building, Ray commented on how stressed I looked. I told him it was nothing more than bad nerves after a long day. He nodded and I pressed on. Yet when I arrived at the elevator again, that inexplicable, unsettling feeling returned. Despite how late it was and how tired I felt, I decided to take the stairs. I was sweating and utterly exhausted after the climb, but eventually I reached my apartment. I chose to forego the bath in favor of a quick shower and then went straight to bed. The next morning, on my way to work, I was disturbed to see paramedics gathered outside the building. Approaching Ray, I asked him what had happened. His face was drawn, his usual smile absent. Leaning in closer and lowering his voice, he said, "It's Mrs. Donovan from 1406. They found her this morning when she didn't answer her door. Her daughter called, worried when she couldn't reach her. A chill ran through me. What happened to her?" "Nobody knows for sure," Ray replied, glancing toward the paramedics. "The police say it looks strange. There are no obvious signs of what killed her." But he hesitated, shifting uncomfortably. "They mentioned she was covered in some kind of white powder, like chalk or something. I've never seen anything like it in my 30 years here. The world seemed to tilt beneath me. White powder, just like in the elevator, just like in my nightmare." "Did you know her?" Ray asked, noticing the pallor in my face. "Not really," I managed to say, my mouth suddenly dry. "I only passed her in the halls sometimes." I tried to recall her face, but all I could conjure was a vague image of an elderly woman with silver hair who always nodded politely when we crossed paths. "They're saying it might have been sudden cardiac arrest, but who knows?" Ray continued. "Poor woman, living alone all these years after her husband passed. At least it was quick, whatever it was." I nodded mechanically, my eyes fixed on the elevator doors. I thanked Ray for the information and mentioned that I had to get to work. Yet deep down I felt disturbed. I had wanted to dismiss the unsettling news about the tenant found dead. But with that bizarre substance mentioned, it was eerily similar to what I'd seen with that tall, hooded figure. The thoughts clung to me, refusing to let me find any peace. The rest of my workday passed in a hazy blur, and I felt detached from everything as I struggled to process the bizarre events of the previous night. I hurried home with anxious dread gnawing at the back of my mind. Arriving back at my apartment building, I mustered the courage to approach the elevator again. The metallic doors slid open with a soft ding, and though I hesitated for just a moment, I stepped inside. My eyes darted around the small, dimly lit space, half expecting shadows to flicker in the corners. Taking a steadying breath, I pressed the button for my floor while carefully scanning the panel for anything unusual. This time, the area between the numbers 12 and 14 was clean and unmarked, devoid of any peculiar chalky residue. The elevator hummed quietly as it ascended, leaving only the sterile scent of metal and the gentle whir of machinery. I exhaled a sigh of relief at the return to normalcy and walked down the hall to my apartment. Just as I inserted my key into the lock, I heard footsteps approaching down the hall. "Oh, hey! I thought that was you." I turned to see Chelsea Matthews, my neighbor from 1604, walking toward me with a reusable grocery bag slung over one arm. Her dark curls were pulled back into a messy bun, and though her face attempted a smile, worry was etched in every line. "Hi, Chelsea." I greeted her with a forced smile. Chelsea glanced over her shoulder before stepping closer. "Did you hear about Mrs. Donovan?" she whispered, her voice tight. I nodded, still holding my key in the door. "Ray told me this morning. It's awful. I can't stop thinking about it," Chelsea admitted, clutching her grocery bag closer to her chest. "I saw her just 2 days ago in the laundry room. She seemed perfectly fine, even talking about her granddaughter's ballet recital. A chill crept up my spine. Did Ray mention the white powder they found? Her eyes widened. Yes, that's what's so strange. My sister works at the police station as a clerk, and she couldn't tell me much, but she said the investigators were baffled. It wasn't any kind of drug or poison they recognized, just this weird chalky substance all over her apartment. Her voice dropped even lower. The medical examiner still hasn't determined a cause of death. My legs felt weak as I leaned against the door frame. That's disturbing. There's something else, Chelsea confided, stepping even closer. Mrs. Donovan mentioned something weird the last time I saw her. She talked about having nightmares of a tall figure in white visiting her at night. She shook her head. I assumed it was just an old woman's imagination, you know? But now, the key slipped from my fingers, clattering against the hardwood floor, making Chelsea jump. Sorry, I mumbled as I bent to retrieve it with trembling hands. Did she say anything else about this figure? Chelsea furrowed her brow. Just that it was impossibly tall and wore some kind of hood. She mentioned it even left marks on her floor, like footprints or something. She shrugged helplessly. I figured it was just her medication giving her vivid dreams. My mouth went dry. And you said this was 2 days ago? Yeah, she nodded. The day before she died. Studying my face, she asked, "Are you okay? You look a bit pale." "I'm fine," I lied, forcing myself to stand a little taller. "Just tired from work. These double shifts are killing me." I fumbled with my key once more. "I should get some rest." "All right then. Take care and stay safe. I'll see you around, and don't work yourself too hard." "Have a good rest of the night," Chelsea said, waving as she headed back to her own apartment. I stepped inside my apartment and released the breath I hadn't realized I was holding. My mind still echoing with all the disturbing things Chelsea had said about Mrs. Donovan and her untimely death. Pushing myself away from the door, I moved through my darkened apartment, flipping on lights as I went. The shadows seemed longer tonight, and the corners of my home appeared darker and more ominous. In the kitchen, I poured myself a glass of wine with shaking hands, spilling a few drops on the counter, though I didn't bother to wipe them up. The television droned on in the background as I curled up on my couch, wrapping myself in a throw blanket despite the warmth of the apartment. News footage of paramedics outside my building played silently, a reporter discussing the mysterious death of an elderly resident. I quickly changed the channel. Sleep proved impossible. Every time I closed my eyes, that hooded figure and the impossible 13th floor replayed in my mind. Chelsea's words about Mrs. Donovan's nightmares echoed incessantly. The same nightmares I'd had, the same figure I'd seen. Around midnight, I finally dragged myself to bed. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling and listening to the occasional creaks and groans of the building settling. My eyelids grew heavy despite my anxiety, and eventually I drifted into an uneasy sleep. I woke with a start, my alarm blaring beside me. For a moment, I felt disoriented, unable to tell if I had truly slept or merely closed my eyes for a few minutes. My body felt heavy and my mind foggy as I dragged myself out of bed and into the shower. The hot water did little to wash away my unease. As I dressed for work, I found myself continuously glancing toward my door, half expecting a knock or the turn of the handle. I chided myself for being irrational, but couldn't shake the dread that had firmly taken root in my mind. My morning routine took longer than usual. Every sound startled me. By the time I was ready to leave, I was already running late. I hesitated at my door, took a deep breath, and stepped into the hallway. The corridor was quiet, with morning light filtering through the windows at each end. I locked my door and headed toward the elevator, only to freeze mid-step. There, in the middle of the hallway, stood Chelsea. I recalled that she worked at a different hospital across town, yet she was in her hospital scrubs, though they looked rumpled as if she'd slept in them. Her hair hung loose and tangled around her shoulders. "Chelsea," I called out cautiously. "Are you okay?" She didn't respond at first, remaining perfectly still with her gaze fixed on the wall. Something about her unresponsive stillness sent a chill down my spine. "Chelsea," I tried again, gently reaching out to touch her shoulder. At my touch, her head snapped toward me, but her eyes remained unfocused, gazing through me rather than at me. Her pupils were dilated and her face looked unnaturally pale. "It comes at night," Chelsea whispered, her voice raspy and strange. "The shadow of death. It wears white, but leaves darkness. It marks them first, The 13th floor. It's waiting there. My blood ran cold. Chelsea, what are you talking about? There is no 13th floor. I saw it last night, she continued, her voice slurring slightly. In the elevator. The button appeared. White dust. So cold. She shuddered violently. It knows who's next. I gripped her shoulders, shaking her gently. Chelsea, snap out of it. Blinking rapidly, Chelsea's eyes gradually focused. Color slowly returned to her face as confusion took over. She looked around, disoriented, before finally recognizing me. Why am I in the hallway? She murmured, touching her forehead and wincing. God, I have such a headache. Was I sleepwalking? I'm not sure, I said uncertainly, my eyes still fixed on her face. You were just standing here talking about strange things. What things? She asked, frowning as she rubbed her temples. I hesitated before replying. About a shadow of death and the 13th floor. Her eyes widened in disbelief. I don't remember any of that. Glancing at her watch, she gasped, Oh God, I'm late. I need to get to work. She hurried toward the elevator, then paused and looked back at me with an embarrassed smile. Sorry about that. Must have been sleepwalking or something. Too many night shifts, you know? Before I could utter a word, Chelsea disappeared around the corner toward the elevator, and I stood frozen in the hallway, my mind racing. The coincidence was too overwhelming, Mrs. Donovan's experience, my own, and now Chelsea mentioning the same horrors. Later, at work, I couldn't focus. Twice, I nearly administered the wrong medication to patients, catching myself just in time. Colleagues asked if I was feeling ill, noting my pallor and distracted state. I blamed it on lack of sleep, which wasn't entirely untrue. During my lunch break, I sat alone in the hospital cafeteria, picking at a salad that I had no appetite for. I pulled out my phone and searched for information about my building's history. Central Heights had been built in the 1970s and renovated in the early 2000s. Nothing unusual, a standard high-rise apartment building. I scrolled further until I stumbled across an old newspaper article about an architectural controversy during its construction. The original plans had included a 13th floor, but due to superstition, the developers had labeled it the 14th, skipping 13 altogether. What caught my attention was a small paragraph noting that the chief architect had either gone missing or died mysteriously before construction was completed. His body was never found either way. My hands trembled as I set down my phone. Couldn't be a mere coincidence. The rest of my shift dragged on endlessly. By the time I clocked out, darkness had fallen, and a fine mist hung in the air, diffusing the streetlights into hazy orbs. I considered taking a different route home, maybe even staying at a hotel for the night, but the thought seemed ridiculous in the rational light of the hospital lobby. I pulled my coat tighter around me and stepped out into the night. The walk home felt longer than usual, each shadow making my heart skip a beat. When I finally reached my building, I noticed Ray was gone for the day, replaced by a night doorman whose name I couldn't recall and who barely looked up from his phone as I entered. I hesitated at the elevator and then decided to head for the stairs, unwilling to risk another encounter. However, when I reached the door to the stairwell, to my shock, it was locked. I turned around and tried to flag down the night doorman, but he had vanished. I looked around, unsure of what to do next, when suddenly the elevator doors opened. I stared at the vacant elevator, its fluorescent light flickering ever so slightly. The interior was pristine. No white powder, no mysterious buttons, no towering figure, just an ordinary elevator waiting patiently for a passenger. Rational thought urged me to step inside, especially since the stairwell was locked and I needed to get to my apartment. Yet my feet remained rooted to the lobby floor, my body refusing the simple command to move. A soft chime sounded as the doors began to close. Acting on instinct, I lunged forward, thrusting my arm between the closing doors. They retracted immediately, and I stepped inside, my heart hammering against my ribs. My finger hovered over the button panel. 16. I could just press 16 and go home. But then my eyes were drawn to the space between 12 and 14, the unmarked space where 13 should be. The doors closed behind me with a soft thud that, in my heightened state, sounded like the slam of a prison gate. I pressed 16 quickly, then backed into the corner, watching the numbers illuminate as the elevator began to ascend. Everything seemed normal at first, and as I ascended, I tried to ignore the lingering feeling of dread. I watched the display numbers slowly increase. Then, to my horror, the elevator stopped. It had halted at 12, but the door wouldn't open. Then the number distorted and went blank, and I felt the elevator creeping up several more feet before stopping on a floor higher than the 12th. The door slid open, and there it was. A hooded figure stood in the doorway, impossibly tall, its white coat hanging from skeletal shoulders. I pressed myself against the back wall of the elevator. My scream caught in my throat. White dust swirled around the figure's feet, drifting into the elevator like fog. "Please," I managed to whisper, though I wasn't sure what I was begging for. The hooded figure bent down and stepped into the elevator. With each step, a noxious cloud of chalky dust spread around it, and I covered my mouth in horror. It extended one impossibly long arm, the sleeve falling back to reveal a hand made entirely of bone, gleaming white in the dim light. It reached out with slow, deliberate motion. I shook my head, tears streaming down my face. "No," I said, my voice growing stronger. "I won't go with you." The figure tilted its hooded head, as if puzzled by my refusal, took a step forward. With every movement, white dust billowed, filling the cramped space with a fine mist that made me cough. A cold emanated from it, an otherworldly chill that penetrated my soul and froze my thoughts. Its hand moved toward the panel, paused, then withdrew as it stepped back into the opposite corner of the elevator. Stood motionless, waiting for the doors to close. I couldn't fathom why it had ignored me, seeming content to ride the elevator up to the 16th floor rather than drag me down into the sepulchral darkness of the 13th. The elevator rose without further incident, the floors passing by in terrible silence as I remained breathless and terrified alongside my monstrous companion. When we arrived at the 16th floor, the entity extended an arm as if bidding me to disembark first. Oddly polite, though still utterly horrifying. I took a nervous step forward, scared of moving, yet even more terrified of staying a moment longer with that skeletal nightmare. I crept past the looming figure and eventually broke into a mad sprint down the hall toward my apartment. I stole one last glance behind me. The thing was gone. Whatever it had been doing on that floor, I couldn't say, but I felt an urgent need to get inside and hide as quickly as possible. I made it to my door, my heart racing as I fumbled with my keys before throwing myself inside, quickly closing and locking the door before bolting to my bedroom. The night stretched on interminably as I huddled beneath my blanket, feeling both foolish and fearful. Part of me knew that the skeletal figure I dreaded wouldn't materialize in my bedroom or elsewhere in my apartment. Yet another part couldn't shake the unsettling anticipation that it might. As the hours dragged by with no sign of the apparition, I hesitated, relieved yet still anxious, before finally succumbing to an uneasy sleep. That sleep, however, was short-lived. I awoke abruptly to a horrible scream that pierced the quiet night. Bolting upright, my heart pounding, I realized the scream wasn't part of a nightmare. It echoed through the hallway outside my apartment, followed by a heavy thud. I scrambled out of bed, fumbling for my phone as I debated whether to call 911 or hide in the bathroom. A strange compulsion drew me toward the door instead. I pressed my eye to the peephole, my breath fogging the small glass circle. At first I saw nothing, then movement caught my eye, a figure walking slowly toward the elevator. It was Chelsea. Her movements were unnervingly stiff, limbs jerking slightly with each step as if controlled by invisible strings. Her eyes were wide and vacant, staring straight ahead. Behind her loomed that same white-robed figure, impossibly tall, its skeletal frame nearly brushing the ceiling. One bone-white hand hovered inches from Chelsea's back, guiding her without actual contact. White dust billowed with each unearthly step, leaving a trail of chalky footprints on the carpet. "Chelsea?" I whispered, my hand clutching the doorknob. I knew I should open the door, or scream, or do something, but my body refused to move. Chelsea and the figure reached the elevator. The doors slid open without either of them pressing a button, revealing an inky darkness. As they stepped inside, Chelsea's head turned slowly, mechanically, toward my apartment. Even through the peephole, I could see that her eyes were completely white now, dusted with the same chalky substance trailing behind the hooded figure. Our gazes locked for one terrifying moment before her face went slack again, and she and the figure stepped into the elevator. The doors closed with a soft chime that seemed disturbingly ordinary amid the horror. I stumbled backward from the door, my legs giving out as I collapsed onto the floor, my breath coming in short, painful gasps. Chelsea, the figure, was taking her to the 13th floor, just as it had tried to take me. Images of Mrs. Donovan's death flashed through my mind. Found covered in white powder, dead without explanation. I knew I had to do something. I had to help Chelsea. With trembling hands, I dialed 911, but the call wouldn't connect. My phone showed full service, yet the call failed repeatedly. Frustrated, I tossed the useless device onto the couch and scrambled to my feet, pulling on a sweatshirt over my pajamas and shoving my feet into sneakers. The rational part of me screamed that I should stay inside, lock the door, and wait until morning. But Chelsea was my neighbor, and I had to try and do something. I grabbed a kitchen knife, fully aware that it would be useless against whatever that thing was, yet clinging to the faint feeling of security it provided. I flung open the door and stepped out into the hallway, my heart hammering against my ribs. The corridor was empty now, but a ghostly trail of white powder led me to the elevator. Clutching the knife in my sweaty hand, I followed the shimmering, luminescent powder on the carpet. When I reached the elevator, I saw the doors still closed and the indicator light paused between floors. My finger hovered over the call button. Was I really doing this? Was I truly going to follow that thing to wherever it had taken Chelsea? Before I could decide, the indicator light began to move again. The elevator was coming back up. I ducked behind a decorative plant in the corner, crouching low as the elevator chimed its arrival. The doors slid open, revealing an empty car. No sign of Chelsea or the figure, just more of that white powder dusting the floor. I approached slowly, knife extended before me. The elevator's interior had a thicker layer of the powder, swirling gently as if disturbed by an unseen breeze. Something compelled me forward, not curiosity, but a desperate need to find Chelsea and rescue her from whatever fate had befallen Mrs. Donovan. I stepped inside, my shoes leaving prints in the dust. The doors closed behind me, and I realized I hadn't pressed a button. The panel remained dark. "No," I whispered to myself. I was too late. The only trace left was the eerie powder shaped like a skeletal finger pressed on the section between the 12 and 14 buttons. I stepped off that horrific elevator and walked numbly back to my apartment, praying that all of this was just a terrible dream. The next day, my greatest fears were confirmed. I rushed downstairs as quickly as I could, and upon emerging in the lobby, I saw the police and paramedics gathered outside the building. My heart sank. Ray was back at his post and, noticing my horrified expression as I appeared in the lobby, he confirmed the truth I had been dreading. With an ashen face, he said in a low voice, "Found her in the hallway this morning, just like Mrs. Donovan. No signs of a struggle, no obvious cause." Leaning closer and glancing around the empty lobby, he added, "And that same white powder all over her. The police are saying it might be some kind of toxic substance in the building. They're bringing in specialists today." I gripped the edge of Ray's desk to steady myself. "Are you all right?" he asked, concern deepening the lines on his weathered face. "You look a bit shaken." "I'm fine," I lied, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. "Just shocked. I talked to her yesterday. She seemed fine." Ray nodded solemnly. "They're saying it might be some kind of chemical hazard. Management's called an emergency meeting tonight. They are trying not to freak people out." He hesitated, then added quietly, "Between you and me, I've been working here for 16 years. I've never seen anything like this. 2 people in 1 week under the same mysterious circumstances. Has anyone else reported anything unusual?" I asked in a barely audible whisper. "Anything about the building? The elevator?" Ray's expression shifted subtly. "Funny you should ask. Mrs. Henderson from 1202 mentioned something about the elevator stopping on a floor that doesn't exist." He shook his head. "I told her she must have pressed the wrong button or imagined it. 13th floor superstition gets to people. This building is old enough to have its quirks." I nodded mechanically. Someone else had seen it. I wasn't losing my mind. "Ray," I said carefully, "have you ever noticed anything strange about the elevator? White powder, maybe, or unusual people using it late at night?" Ray's eyes sharpened as he studied me. "Why do you ask?" "Just curious," I offered, my attempt at casual conversation failing miserably. Glancing around once more, Ray motioned for me to lean closer. "There have been stories about this building for years," he whispered. "Back in the 70s, during construction, workers refused to continue after dark. They said they saw things. Management called it superstition and fired anyone who complained." He paused before adding, "The architect went missing and the foreman died before it was finished. Found in the elevator shaft between what would have been the 13th floor. Covered in white powder," I murmured, finishing for him. His eyes widened, and he nodded slowly. For a long, heavy moment, Ray was silent. Finally, he sighed, his shoulders slumping. "I've worked here for 16 years. I've seen residents come and go. I've watched this building age. 3 years ago, the night janitor quit without notice, left his keys, his uniform, everything. He just disappeared. Before he left, he told me something I've never forgotten." He swallowed hard. "He said he'd seen death itself in the service elevator, wearing a heavy white coat." A chill ran down my spine. "And did you believe him?" "I didn't," Ray admitted. "I thought he was hitting the bottle too hard. But then," he trailed off, glancing toward the bank of elevators. "I've seen things too. Glimpses. Shadows where there shouldn't be shadows." "Why haven't you left?" I asked quietly. Ray's expression hardened. "This is my home. It has been for a long time. Whatever's happening, I'm not letting it chase me away." He straightened, returning to his professional demeanor. "You should be careful. Maybe stay with family for a few days until they figure out what's going on." I nodded, though I knew no investigation would uncover the truth. What was happening defied all rational explanation. "Thank you, Ray," I said, turning toward the door. "I'll be careful." I briefly considered taking the day off from work, but I decided against it since I figured I could use the distraction to ignore the insanity swirling around me there. At the busy hospital, I almost forgot the horrors of the night before. But as my shift ended, the dread of returning home settled over me. I lingered for a while, making small talk with colleagues who were just starting their shifts. Anything to delay the inevitable. Outside, twilight had fallen. The streets were quieter than usual, or perhaps it only seemed so to me as each echoing footstep counted down the moments until I got back to my home. Central Heights loomed ahead, its windows lit against the darkening sky. How many residents had no idea what lurked between the floors? How many came and went, oblivious to the horror stalking the hallways at night? As I approached the entrance, I noticed a small crowd gathered outside. Police tape cordoned off part of the sidewalk, and officers were speaking with some residents. An ambulance idled nearby, lights off but doors open. "What's happening?" I asked a pale-faced woman hovering at the edge of the crowd. The woman turned and said in a shaky tone, "Another one, Mrs. Henderson from 1214. Found her in the stairwell about an hour ago." My blood ran cold. Mrs. Henderson, the same woman Ray had mentioned, who'd seen the 13th floor. My legs nearly gave way. "White powder?" I asked, already dreading the answer. She nodded. "That's what they're saying. Just like the others. 3 deaths in 1 week. People are talking about moving out." I pushed through the crowd toward the entrance. Ray wasn't at his post, probably being questioned by the police, and the other night doorman looked visibly shaken. "Excuse me," he called as I passed. "They're advising residents to stay elsewhere tonight if possible. Building management is putting people up at the Coventry Hotel until they determine if there's an environmental hazard." "Thanks," I mumbled in a terrified daze. I wasn't in any mood to argue. I headed for the Coventry Hotel, hoping for a night's safety away from the building and its haunting specter of death. After checking into my room, my mind whirled with doubt and fear. The terrifying enigma of Central Heights dominated my thoughts, compelling me to consider leaving. Whatever was happening in that building, be it a deadly hallucinogenic powder or the grim specter of death itself, it did not matter anymore. I had to get out. The urge to flee was overwhelming, though a small, nagging part of me hesitated at the idea of abandoning the familiar for the unknown. I didn't have much money, and while I could potentially find a smaller place and hire movers to leave that cursed building behind, the decision felt more daunting than ever. I eventually resolved to leave and find someplace else to live. It was a hasty decision, but I grimly speculated that it might be a life or death situation, and I shuddered at the thought of the people I knew who had already been taken. With that resolution, I tried to settle down, and at last, I fell into a relatively comfortable sleep. Then, as if in the very next moment, my eyes snapped open in a flash. To my horror, I was alone in the elevator. White dust was everywhere, on the floor, swirling in the air, coating my skin. The numbers on the panel flickered, and a single glowing button remained, 13. I hadn't pressed it, but the elevator moved anyway, descending to a floor that shouldn't exist. When the doors opened, I didn't see a hallway but a vast, cavernous space. White dust drifted like snow in stagnant air. In the center stood that hooded figure, even taller than before, its skeletal hands extended toward me. At its feet lay 3 bodies, Mrs. Donovan, Chelsea, and Mrs. Henderson, their skin bleached white, eyes open yet unseeing. Behind the figure, more shapes emerged from the swirling dust. Dozens, hundreds of them, all victims of the thing that dwelled between floors. And it was waiting for me to join them. Despite my overwhelming horror, a strange compulsion tugged at me, defying all logic. Before I could resist, my feet moved on their own, carrying me toward the morbid sight. The doors closed behind me with a metallic groan, and in the distance, I heard the faint hum of the retreating elevator, leaving me alone with that enigmatic figure. It moved ahead, its long coat dragging along the floor and leaving a trail of white, chalky dust. In a daze, I followed, as the oppressive silence wrapped around me like a shroud. The hallway seemed to stretch on endlessly, its walls lined with doors that bore no resemblance to those in my own building. They were older, heavier, each adorned with strange symbols that pulsed faintly in the dim light. Abruptly, the figure halted, tilting its head slightly as if straining to listen to something. I strained my ears, desperate to catch any sound, but only near silence met me. Then, almost imperceptibly at first, I began to hear a faint whisper, soft and indistinct, steadily growing louder. The sound sent shivers down my spine, completely out of place in that world. The figure turned to face me, and for the first time, I noticed a subtle movement beneath its hood. Shadows twisted and writhed within. My breath caught as the figure raised a hand, its impossibly long, pale fingers pointing toward a door at the far end of the hall. As the whisper grew clearer, A jolt of terror struck me when I heard my name called repeatedly in a voice disturbingly familiar. The door at the end of the hall creaked open by itself, revealing a space bathed in eerie, flickering light. I took a hesitant step back, but it was too late. The figure seized my arm with a cold, unyielding grip and pulled me forward. I stumbled toward the open door as the whispers crescendoed into a deafening roar, and in that moment, I stepped through the threshold into a nightmare from which I might never awake. And yet, I did wake, gasping and tangled in sweat-soaked sheets. The hotel room was dark except for the red glow of the digital clock reading 3:13 a.m. My heart pounded painfully against my ribs as I fumbled for the bedside lamp. Light flooded the room, revealing ordinary hotel furnishings.
No dust.
No figures, just a bland room with standard artwork and heavy curtains drawn against the night. I collapsed back onto the pillows, trying to slow my breathing. It had just been a nightmare, but as I glanced toward the carpet near the door, I saw a fine white powder dusting the threshold, as if someone or something had tried to enter. Frozen, I stared at the white trace. It hadn't been there when I checked in. Then a sinking dread gripped me. My eyes darted down to my feet, now engulfed in a thick layer of the eerie, chalky substance. Panic surged as I bent to touch my foot, and there it was, a bruise vivid and sinister, marking the exact spot where an otherworldly hand had seized my arm with unyielding force. Desperation clawed at my mind as I scrambled for a shred of logic, but only chaos answered. The figure had found me. Even here, miles from Central Heights, it had tracked me down. Or perhaps I had even ventured into its lair in my sleep. Couldn't be real, but the powder by the door and on my feet was real. The deaths were real, and whatever was hunting me wouldn't stop until it had claimed me too. I hurriedly dressed, hands shaking as I stuffed my few belongings into a bag. I knew I had to leave, to put as much distance as possible between myself and everything here. I crossed several state lines and did not have a destination, besides as far away as I could get from that nightmare and the being that might even now still be searching for me. Yet, even abandoning my possessions and leaving, doubt still gnaws at my resolve. Perhaps leaving the city entirely and abandoning everything might be enough. But deep down, I wonder whether it could ever be enough. I don't know if I can ever outrun the shadow of death itself that haunts the 13th floor